welcome, welcome everybody to this. Thank you again for joining us at this 7th symposium of computational creativity. And let's start with the first presentation. So we have, Simon Colton, Sebastian Burns, and Blanca Perez Herrera. We have a work from them. They are presenting us. Let me find the work. The title for this work. Sorry, it's so they are presenting us the title of their paper: First Experiments in the Automatic Generation of Pseudo-Profound, Pseudo-Bullshit Image Titles. Over to you, guys.
Hello, everyone. Great to be here and to see everyone and to see your dog, Edmund. I don't think that would happen if it wasn't on Zoom. It's good to be here. So can you all see my screen with the slides on? They should have gone full screen. Still there? Brilliant. Okay, so I'll just do this. Some of you may well have heard me talking bullshit all the time. But today I'm going to be talking about bullshit, so hopefully that'll be a nice change. And looking at pseudo-profound bullshit image titles, work with Sebastian Burns and Blanca Perez Herrera, as per the slide. Okay, so this is work connected to the Art Done Quick project. This is an iOS app for general release later in the year on iPhones and iPads. And this is going back to maybe 15 years of work on evolutionary art. I've now got a very fast process which can make images. And if you're interested in the image generation, do ask me about it or see some of the many papers I've written on it recently. And the idea is that the app can make art material, kind of baseline images for you, with which you can very rapidly develop them into the kind of images you're seeing on the right of the slide there, using kind of post-hoc editing, manipulation of the genome, and crossover and mutation, that kind of thing. So Art Done Quick is a casual creator, where the whole point of the exercise is to enable people to have fun. And you'll see the app on the right-hand side there. I'm tapping on the screen in this video. So casual creators are creatively support tools where the primary aim is for users to enjoy themselves, much more so than control or professional production. So often an AI system has to step in. So you see I've added fun elements like throwing the image around with a physics engine. And you've got crossover and mutation with the double tapping there. And in a second, you'll see me dragging one on top of the other and getting some children from that. So it's a kind of classic evolutionary art turned into a fun thing. If you're interested in casual creators, I would advise you to read the work of Kate Compton. Her ICCC paper in 2015 was seminal in this area, and she has a fantastic 500-page PhD thesis on this. So she did a lot of the conceptual development. She just surveyed loads of apps. She came up with very important design patterns for casual creators, and she wrote her own systems to demonstrate these and much, much more. So do look for Kate's work. One of the things I'll mention is that she suggested entertaining evaluations as a design pattern. So getting the AI system to look at what you're making and give you some feedback in an entertaining way. So that's and that's what I'll be looking at today. Okay. So I've developed Art Done Quick with a fun first development methodology. And again, on the right is another demo of me doing drawing on it, because everyone loves drawing, and drawing mandalas because everyone loves
Simon, your slides are not changing. We can still just see your title slide only.
Ah, okay. That would be bad. Can you see them now?
Yes.
So but you're seeing the whole thing, but that... okay, so when I go full screen, it's caused a problem. So if it's okay, I'll do it like this.
That looks fine to me.
Okay, so as long as you can see them. Okay, so they're the kind of images I was talking about. So these are raw material post-produced to produce more beautiful images like that. The video here is of me tapping the screen and then double tapping. That's the slide I mentioned about Kate Compton's work, so do check out her work. and in this slide, which is where I've caught up to. So they're the kind of images, that's the kind of interface. It's very fast, very smooth. And I'll just show you one double tap to show you the kind of AI behind it, some evolutionary art going on. I think I double tap, yeah, I just double tap one and I got 8 variations of it, and I can carry on doing that to my heart's content. So this video is showing the kind of design patterns I've looked at. Well, basically, I've used a fun-first development methodology. So reducing the frustration, evolutionary art can be very slow and painful. So I've got rid of that, made it very fast and smooth. I've implemented some of Kate Compton's on my own design patterns known to increase fun. And I've stolen ideas from other apps. So here is symmetrical kind of mandala generation. And you can see that adds to the fun with any luck. And later on in this video, which I won't show you because I'm running out of time already, you'll see that I involve some kind of liquefaction and so forth. My idea has been to always ask the question, has the new implementation, the new functionality, has that increased the fun that users have? Okay, so what I'm looking at today is image captioning. So we've added some captioning and clustering of the images to help people keep track of their creations and feel ownership of them, but more to the point, to provide entertaining and humorous evaluations so that they enjoy it a little more. And there's 3 ways that we do captioning, firstly, using machine vision via ResNet. So if it looks a bit like something in one of the 1,000 ImageNet categories, it will be tagged with that, and that will give you a nice image caption. We use RGB color information when that ResNet isn't available. And then the more interesting thing is template-based international art English, pseudo-profound, pseudo-bullshit templates. So this is tongue-in-cheek humor. And when you zoom in on the images, as you'll see in this video now, you'll see that you get these images, you get these captions generated. So I'll read a few out. So that's untitled deep magenta, untitled see an enemy. So that looks like a see an enemy. Oscilloscope picture, to symbolically form relation. So that's art English. Film of a panpipe, a production of formal proposition, metaphysical tendency, slight construction, a drive to change. The portrait of dark green, so there is dark green in there. Form in unique convention. You present as a definite dynamics, untitled aluminium, and so on and so on. So you can see that some of them are tagged with things which they look a little bit like. Some are tagged with colors, and some are what might be called bullshit, which I will come on to in a second. So just covering these different types. I haven't got time to go into how ResNet is used. There's a paper on this if you're interested at ICCC 2020 and one at Evo Musart 2020 with different details in. So basically you can run ResNet, this machine vision neural model, very quickly on a mobile device in milliseconds. And anything which is sent back as 80% confidence is tagged and used in the image captioning. So there's 3 nice ones there. Basketball with rounded up 100% confidence that ResNet thinks that's a basketball. 92% confidence that that looks like a tree frog. That's one of my favorites. You can never not see a tree frog once you've been told it looks like a tree frog. But before that, you probably would never say it's a tree frog. An acoustic guitar is great because it's obviously not in the shape of a whole acoustic guitar, but it's actually the sound hole for a guitar. So it's picked that up quite nicely with 83% confidence. Moving on. There is a way of telling what colors are in an image, very basic approach really. Because they're mostly black, I had to come up with a method where you sample 1,000 pixels, and if 50 are of the same color, roughly, then we can use that color title meaningfully in the image. I got the colors from html.csscolor.com, and they're beautifully lyrically tagged, these colors. So you don't just get kind of pink, you get lavender rose, you get moody blue, which are really nice for image captions. I love that image over there of the clusters. I was very pleased to put it in the paper, but I haven't got time to tell you how I managed to improve that. It basically took about 5 seconds to choose the right color for an image when I started, and then I brought it down to milliseconds by using some clustering approaches. If you're interested in the technical detail of that, do please see the paper. So moving now on to the bullshit side of the image captioning. So these people, Rule and Levine, they wrote a book called International Art English, and this was quite controversial. They described International Art English as having everything to do with English, but emphatically not being English. And they put their money where their mouth was really, and they analyzed 14,000 press releases from eflux.com, which is an art subscription service. And they identified three things, really. One, which is a high usage of words which you'd ordinarily never hear anywhere else, like dialectic. There is a high redundancy of words in phrases. Why use 2 words to say something when you can use 5 words to say something? And often the words being used in International Art English are there for aesthetic pleasure rather than communication. These 3 things are quite common in International Art English. And they hypothesize that this is really used to exclude common readers from the group of people who just get it. It's elitism, basically. And they hypothesize this comes from the fact that lots of post-structuralist texts were translated from the French, and that gave an opportunity to obfuscate, really. Here's a great one that I found while looking through eflux.com. This is an actual title of an article written in that magazine. It's called Suspended Munition, Meriology, Morphology, and Mammary Biopolitics of Transmission in Simone Lee's Trophallaxis. That is the kind of art English which puts up a barrier and says, you're not welcome, if you go with what Rule and Levine are saying. Okay, so that's the baseline really for the bullshit generation that I use. Here is not some philosophical bullshit, but some philosophy about bullshit. So there's actually a well-studied, well, not really well-studied, but partially studied area, the notion of bullshit in language. Pennycook et al. Looked at pseudo-profound bullshit statements. These seem to convey some sort of potentially profound meaning, but are merely a collection of buzzwords put together randomly in a sentence that retains syntactic structure. And they give some examples. Hidden meaning transforms unparalleled abstract beauty. The kind of thing which you think, oh, that's really clever. And then when you read it and look into it and with a bit of scrutiny, makes no sense. And they say that it's not just in International Art English where this is used, but also lots of influencers. There's a phrase here from an influencer on YouTube, I think, where who uses these phrases like attention and intention are the mechanics of manifestation. Doesn't really say anything, but sounds quite clever on first blush. Then there's this noted philosopher, Harry Frankfurt, who is an emeritus professor at Princeton, so quite a well-known person. And he distinguishes bullshit from lying because there's no deliberate subversion of the truth, although, as you will know, bullshitters often do so to hide ignorance or present authority when there is or should be none. Just before Donald Trump got elected, he wrote an article in Time magazine on why Donald Trump is an expert bullshitter. And he's obviously the kind of person you imagine when you talk about bullshitters. So there has been some work on bullshit in art titles. Turpin et al. Attached pseudo-profound bullshit titles to computer-generated abstract art pieces. And the titles were generated with no regard to the image, such as the death echo. They don't really give enough details about the image generation or the title generation, so I couldn't get stuck into that really. They did study the effect of these though, and they found that the perception that people have of profoundness is higher with these titles when compared to more mundane titles such as Canvas 8. They also showed a strong correlation between the profoundness ratings of International Art English titles and these pseudo-profound bullshit titles. And they have this lovely paper called Bullshit Makes the Art Grow Profounder. And it was thanks to John McCormack who put me onto that paper that I was enabled to get into this area and actually do some implementation. Finally, Leder et al. Identify a difference between descriptive and elaborative art titles. So for the same piece, you could call it Dark Zigzag Lines on Subdued Background, or you could call it Breaking into the Technical Era, both of which would be appropriate titles. And they showed with their studies that descriptive titles increase understanding in short exposures of like a second. They were interested in whether the titles add to people's understanding. But if you want longer, more thorough understanding of pieces, then the more elaborate phrases, titles do a better job at kind of 10-second intervals. So that was a background from where I came to adding my bullshit captionings for these images. And I use the same thing that Rule and Levine use, which is a sketch engine. It's a fantastic EU project at sketchengine.eu, and I use it to extract 50 keywords from 170,000 sentences in a corpus of International Art English. It's a really nice resource. And they were basically in 3 areas: overused in international art English, like manifestation, dialectical, abstract. I also extracted some generally highbrow words like intellectual, contemporary, proposition, and some obvious art terms such as juxtaposition, paint, void, and imagine. Then we also added to this data by using Sketch Engine to produce a thesaurus of words from International Art English, which is different to generating a thesaurus of words from any other English corpus because of International Art English's distinct nature. So related words to abstract in Art English are sculptural, conceptual, and narrative. But if you do the same exercise with the English web corpus, then words related to abstract are visual, experimental, and original. So they're very different words you get there. I also use Sketch Engines to produce word sketches from which we extracted multiple modifiers for each keyword. So for example, for the keyword abstract, we can get modifiers resolutely, completely, and purely. So you can put them in front of it. So you can say resolutely abstract, completely abstract, purely abstract. And you can see we're already getting some nice International Art English phrasing going. This is not particularly technical work, so the templates were very straightforward. I had 10 ones to wrap ResNet categories in. These are the objects which are seen by the machine vision systems. I had 10 templates to wrap color information in, and I kept it quite simple in order to not obfuscate what has been seen in them. So these are only pseudo bullshit and not entire bullshit because they actually refer to the English rather than being completely unrelated. Then I put together 50 templates to generate phrases which sound like they might come from International Art English in formats supplied from art history. That's where Blanca Perez Ferrer came in to advise on the kind of phrasing used in actual titles of real artworks, famous or not. So an example template is abstract invention of the modifier reflection. And the full list of templates is in the paper. So very straightforward. You can switch in and out different words for the keywords, and you can put modifiers in there and get lots and lots, loads. You know, I don't know how many, but tens of thousands of different phrases from these 50 templates. And they're used in order. ResNet object categorizations are quite rare. I think it's something like 1 in 20 you get of those. Color information is also relatively rare because some images are so noisy that there is no one color that you can extract from them, but you can always make up bullshit. So I do it in that order. If you can extract ResNet or color information, then use them. If not, throw in something completely unrelated but sounding quite pseudo-profound. To evaluate this process, myself and Sebastian Burns, with a background in art, I guess, Sebastian certainly, we assessed 100 generated titles attached to the given images, and we asked ourselves to categorize the titles into basically unreadable because their grammar is so bad, ones which hit the mark of pseudo-profound, pseudo-bullshit, and then anything else which we thought might be a useful categorization of them. So Sebastian came up with I came up with an evaluation that 8 were ungrammatical and so no good, 30 were bullshit, and then I came up with emotional and conceptual as these 2 categories, 21 emotional and 41 conceptual. Sebastian was more derisive, I guess, and thought more of them were more bullshit. 9 ungrammatical, 53 bullshit, 30 he called descriptive, and 8 he called poetic. And that kind of felt okay for this first implementation. These are early experiments. And we've got the breakdown of the titles and the categories in the paper if you want to see how we categorize them. Here are some examples using ResNet objects. So invention of the oscilloscope, the freedom of the jellyfish. These all look a little bit like the thing that ResNet thinks are in there. And there's some grammatical changes I would like to do, like encounter on a sea urchin will probably be better encounter with a sea urchin. And there's ones using color down there, contemporary collage of sea green, abstraction in dark goldenrod. These are nice titles that reflect the color in the images. Here are some that we decided were unrelated to the image, the titles, but they were interpretable conceptually. So a reduction of creative fear, scientific production of the subversive, expose the authentic force. These can all be actually understood as phrases, so they're not complete bullshit. And the ones at the bottom were interpretable emotionally. So my favorite there is Painting of the 10th Emptiness. Painting of Emptiness is quite emotional anyway, but the idea that there are 10 of these really adds to the weight there. And you've got the format of fear and the unresolved feeling. Finally, we had some which were really pseudo-profound bullshit, and these were basically nonsense sounding clever, which had no relationship to the image. So background of an overview, the sensibility of subjectivity, design in minimalist stereotype, really quite nonsensical, but you know, quite tongue-in-cheek and interesting to add to these titles in a fun way, tongue-in-cheek. So in future work, I want to look at bullshit more seriously and look at how that can help creativity research and practice. If any of you have been using the GPT-3 natural language generation model, you'll know that a lot of that would fall into the bullshit category, this linguistic category. And if you can see past the negative connotations of bullshit, we can think of bullshit titles as a kind of counterpoint to a piece, or a text to accompany it in an equal part in a diptych. So it doesn't have to reflect it, but can just add value to it. It's also worth bearing in mind that Sebastian and I differed on our description of bullshit. So we need to be careful in ruling things out or ruling them in because of bullshit. I want to increase the accuracy of the process, but I don't want to be too good. There's a phrase in English called, we have to separate the wheat from the chaff. And with Twitter bots and with this kind of image titling, you want to have to go through a certain amount of rubbish, because then you feel like you've found the jewel in the crown or the needle in the haystack. So I don't want it to become perfect, otherwise it would kind of lose some of the charm. But they need to be syntactically correct. There's some failures there. And yes, it would be nice to have the titles in themes or clusters. And I will be releasing Art Done Quick in this summer, I hope. So that's the end of my talk. I'll leave you with this video where you'll see in a second it does the clustering. If there are any questions, now's your time to ask them, I guess. Thank you very much for listening. I went at a breakneck speed there. Apologies.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Simon, for your talk. Do you have questions?
Here's the clustering. Quite a nice effect. Well, do put any questions in the chat. I'll be here for the whole afternoon. If anyone wants to ask. It's giving the clusters titles there, like one down here, Intense Japonicas, and you can throw them around. It's all meant to be quite fun. Roses of bloom. Liliaceous amaranths. If you don't know what an amaranth is, it's worth checking out. A mythical flower that never dies. Okay, I'll stop sharing the screen.
Thank you. Any questions from
Anna? Do you want to ask a question?
Yeah, I'll pass over to other people if other people want to ask questions. But thank you, Simon. What did I write down there? One person's bullshit is another person's high philosophy. That grabbed my attention. I was thinking very much that. So I work a lot across disciplines, and sometimes I read other people's titles and text and feel like I'm in that bullshit world. And then it's quite nice to actually have something to refer to in this international art English.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask about that actually. It's a bit it's not asking you about your work specifically, but what were Rule and Levine trying to get to with their definition of art, international art English, IAE?
It's difficult to know, because a lot of it was overwhelmed with the publicity that that Canopy Press, or the name of the editors, wanted to get around this. So they kind of tried to cook up a storm of controversy. So I don't think Rule and Levine actually wanted to annoy the art world, but they managed to do so. And there's lots of follow-up essays, or there's some follow-up essays saying, no, this is all, cleverly, none of these are bullshit. They're all real titles. And if you just spend some time understanding them, it's like a fine wine, people were saying. I think they just wanted to analyze it, because they looked at this corpus and realized that it's definitely a barrier. I mean, I don't even know what Mariology is. And I'm an academic, so it's definitely putting things in the way. And I think maybe after they've written it, they want to try and tear down those barriers. My wife is Blanca Perez-Ferrer, the author on second author, third author on this, and it's her job as a cultural mediator to try and cut down those barriers, and she hates all of that international art English, especially as it's actually a third language. So yeah, I mean, it's a very short essay that they turned into a book, and they highlight these three things and show that they're statistically supported. You'd never read dialectical anywhere other than in an arts manifesto or art publication.
Right.
Edmund, you've got a real hand up. Hi.
Yeah, you use color as an input. I was wondering if you could use shape as an input.
Yes, I've looked at that, but one of the design decisions for the app as a whole is to make them all quite circular. There's a number of practical reasons for that. And so I don't know whether you remember them, but they're mostly round. Sometimes they look like a cheese with a wedge out of them. And actually, I try and rule those ones out. So no, it may well be that I can use things like donut shape, because some of them are like that. But when I originally started out with these, there were all sorts of shapes and I could have used them, but I've narrowed it down to more circular ones. So shape's a possibility, but it's not so easy in this particular app.
Okay.
Well, thank you very much. If you have more questions, you can use the chat, as Simon suggested before. And let's move on to the next talk. We have Ana Cansalo and A.K.Jordanous. They have this paper, role-based perceptions of computer participants in human-computer co-creativity. Over to you. Thanks.
Okay, hello. My name is Anna Cansalo, and I'm presenting joint work with A.K.Jordanous on the role of computers in human-computer co-creativity. So the full title is focused on the perception that humans have about computer participants in human-computer co-creativity, rather than the actual role of computers in that process. So I am going to explain you in a while why we focus on the perception part. So our work is greatly influenced by us willing to design better systems. And we believe that by understanding the roles of computers that they can hold in co-creative processes, we can begin to give them also new roles and new abilities in the co-creative process, and thus increase their ability beyond what is currently seen in computational creativity. So today I'm going to start by a short introduction on what are roles and how we perceive them, and then short introduction behind the ideas why we studied roles, and then go into the roles that we have seen in human creativity. Then I'm going to go through 3 categories of roles that we identified in our research on human-computer co-creative roles. This was a study based on literature alone, but we are going to extend this towards a practical study. And then finally, I am going to give you some conclusions of the research that we did. So a role is an assignation of specified responsibilities and behaviors that an agent plays in a collaboration. This is the definition that we use in our paper. And you can think of roles being either emergent or predefined. So emergent roles are something that take some specific tasks or some specific stances that the system takes during co-creation without there being an intended purpose for the system in that regard before the co-creative process started. But as we mostly have in literature are predefined roles of computers, so roles focused on what computers could do and maybe what they could do in the future. So that is the focus of this talk. And these are, of course, related to the perception of what we think is possible at the moment instead of actual systems that may be out there and used in different ways during long-term collaborations. So these predefined roles reflect our thinking about what kind of co-creative companionship is possible between a human and a computer. And if we study them, we become more aware of these roles and these boundaries that basically held co-creative systems in place, and may restrict our thinking and ability to design new systems that are able to co-create in more novel and perhaps even more effective ways. Roles are something that happens in many human collaborations. And there are some roles that are sort of more general. For example, these Belbin team roles. They discuss different kinds of roles that humans take in teams or organizations that facilitate the everyday workings of that specific organization. But there are also some creativity-specific roles like Edward de Bono's thinking hats, in which specific individuals or the same individual specifically chooses to take on different roles at different time of a creative thinking process in order to sort of spread wider the view that you have on a creative problem. But in general, throughout these kind of different roles, creativity is typically reserved for specific roles, while in practice, research supports that fluid roles emerging over time support creativity of the whole team or complete organization better than specific predefined roles. So let's look at roles in human-computer co-creativity. So human-computer co-creativity is a specific subdomain of computational creativity that focuses on collaboration between humans and computers on creative tasks. It has also background in interaction design. And in interaction design, we have this subcategory of systems called creativity support tools. Now, the specific difference between a creativity support tool and a human-computer co-creative system is that in a human-computer co-creative system, the system always assumes some sort of responsibility over the creative artifact that is created through that process, whereas a creativity support tool may be something simplistic that just facilitates, for example, multiple humans working together. So we could, for example, think this Zoom call as a creativity support tool if we decide to do something creative during this Zoom session. So the history of roles in human-computer co-creativity relies a lot on these roles already defined for creativity support tools in creativity support tool specific literature. Then current roles described in computational creativity literature increase the amount of creative responsibilities taken on by the computational system in the co-creative scenario. But we also found that there are some future speculations that cover more roles that tend towards social roles instead of or only ability-based roles. So on systems that are able to, for example, take a specific creative stance and argue for their own use in the co-creative process. So let's go over the supportive roles. So these are the three main roles that emerge from creativity support tool literature. So there are the roles of support, train, and enable. In a supportive role, a system can act as sort of a pen pal or a running shoe that enables the human to carry on their creative work. In a training mode, the system will try to enhance the creative capabilities of the human by training them with a specific creativity method. And finally, in the enabling role, the system itself enables some kind of creativity that could not exist without the system. So, for example, a creativity support tool that would enable a human to create something new could be, for example, a flute, because without the flute, there is no way a human could produce that kind of sound. Then when we move towards co-creative systems, we get this collegial role in which a computer takes on some of these responsibilities. For example, the generation of artifacts or the evaluation of them, or the ability to find problems and sort of set the stage for creativity or set the boundaries for the creative act. And finally, when we move on to the social roles, we found that there are these hypothetical roles so far, because we didn't see any specific implementations of these yet, that include some sort of control over the initiative in the co-creative scene. So there can be, for example, pleasing agents or supportive agents that sort of conform to the human's viewpoints of the art that is created during the co-creative process. But there is also this opposite view of taking a provoking or antagonistic position that sort of tries to argue with the human about the creative artifact that is being created in order to promote creativity through that way. Overall, we saw that there is some overlap already between human-human and human-computer roles in creativity. So this, on the left side, you see different Belbin team roles, and on the right side, you see different roles or different tasks that we found in the creativity support tool and computational creativity literature. And we found that the human roles sort of tend to cover multiple roles from the computational creativity literature at the same time, but while sort of the computational roles are more specifically defined. But of course, we can from this get the idea that the computers in practice are also able to facilitate multiple roles at the same time, or they can take multiple roles at the same time. And that is really something that we are really interested in. So currently, roles reflect the thinking that we have about what is possible in human-computer co-creativity. And by making these ideas explicit, we can break them. And one key idea that comes from the human-human creativity literature is that in order to gain more from roles, you would have to be able to move flexibly between the different roles. And finally, the roles that we saw in computational creativity literature were originally very support focused, but over the time we have seen a range of different collegial roles. And in the future, we hopefully will see more roles that also focus on the type of interactions had instead of just the materials provided to the human to play with in the co-creative scene. Okay, I am happy to take questions. In the paper, we have also described a short experiment that we intend to conclude with Anna as soon as possible, once we get the go-ahead from the ethics committees. But this work was a bit delayed by the recent Brexit problems of having to agree whether or not the actual study will be conducted in Britain or within the EU.
Yeah, a very strange effect of Brexit.
Right, thank you very much. Any questions, please? So I have a question, if you are thinking about your question. I have a question to ask about this kind of interactions between human and human,
Yep.
human computer. So, for example, you have these categories, so these kind of roles that the humans can
Yep.
play in interaction, and they can, in many cases, play a role, and they are the ones who generate ideas, and in other cases they are the constructors of the things and so on. So they swap the hats, as you said before.
Yep.
To some extent, you said this should be done in interaction human computer.
Yep.
That's the first part of the question. How that could be, how the computer can change the hat. It would be difficult. And then the other part of the question: what happens with the interaction between computer interaction? So they do different systems changing hats to collaborate in an environment where they both make decisions and they construct and then they swap. And what are your views about that? So
let me start with the human-computer co-creativity related question and then move on to computer-computer co-creative. This switching of hats is, to me, somehow a similar problem to knowing when a user needs, for example, help when they are working with the program or some sort of other interactive prompt. So there are different kinds of approaching this. So you could look at the cues over the course of using the system. You could track the movement of the mouse, or you could track the movement of the eyes of the user if you're willing to go more invasive, in order to sort of interpret whether they are having trouble in the creative process, and could maybe benefit from a prompt. And basically, this means that the whole problem of changing the hats is sort of related to the problem of interpreting how humans, interpreting human cues in any kind of system, or emotion in any kind of system. So that is a problem that is being studied in some fields already, including, I think, education, probably also in some recommender systems. At least Facebook will try and see when you stop in order to show you similar materials and interpret your sort of cues of how you work with the system in order to know what to do next. Then on computer systems, that's a really good question, how to facilitate that, because there is no this kind of extra communication channel there. There's just what we bring into the mix, so to speak. So I would, in those kind of systems, I would probably try and get more of these explicit channels. Usually systems that co-create, to my understanding, are largely large simulations of systems collaborating at the same time, and they are usually exchanging artifacts at the same stage. So really the natural time in those kind of systems cannot be used in a similar way than when in continuous communication with a human, for example. So I think there are sort of two different areas here with two different kinds of problems. So basically, in computer co-creativity, what you can use in order to detect this kind of need to change the hat, so to speak, you will have to think about the whole system and how it is built and what kind of cues there are in order to sort of get this information across.
Yeah, just to follow up, part of our motivation for writing this paper was to have that kind of question in discussion. We'll have those two questions in discussion.
Right, thank you very much. There is a question from Simon.
Right, yeah, you may have already covered this, but well, thanks for a great talk. Very interesting work. Yeah, so the idea of a creativity support tool, even though it's co-creative, the support is never normally the creative role. It's never necessarily the kind of lead role. I'm just wondering whether you're thinking you'll be looking at still co-creativity, but the human supports the creativity of the software, of the machine, and what would that mean? And perhaps it brings in loads of questions of computational creativity, of course. Why would you want to do that? And what benefits would it be for the person supporting the software, and supporting the software in what? And I point you towards the idea of the machine condition, the idea that the software can express itself, what's going on in its life, in order for us to understand it. But yeah, there's a question there, which is, are you thinking about incorporating this kind of flip?
That's a magnificent sort of philosophical topic, and we actually take a stance in the paper into this, because we were discussing some of the human roles that I didn't actually mention in this presentation, but there's this idea of actual factual study of how artists work with technologists. And in those roles, they were sort of emergent roles that the artist and technologist assumed based on their skills. And in some cases, we saw specific, this kind of collaborations in which the artist sort of wanted to have the final say, whereas in other cases, the technologist was allowed to participate in the process much more and integrate throughout. And we actually thought that it would be quite interesting to turn this setting around and have the computer sort of to lead the artistic process here. And I think to some extent, there are systems that have tried to alleviate this problem by including multiple computational systems and having a human as an interactor in a sort of less important role. For example, the Curious Whispers project, it had 3 computers that were co-creating, and then a human may come into that process, but they don't need to come into that process sort of. So that puts the human and the computers already in a much more level basis. But I think that is a really good question. What is then to gain for the human who participates in this sort of process? And I think that is a discussion that needs to be viewed from multiple perspectives, including like an ethical point of view of like, are you training a system that will maybe take over your job later, or whatever, and that's a really interesting discussion I would love to have. So maybe that's a good panel topic for
a future event. Yeah,
someday. Yeah,
I'm glad you kind of mentioned the paper. Are we going to be able to get hold of these papers, by the way? I don't know.
Yeah, they're being published by AISB on the website. I understand they're getting uploaded after the convention. In fact, Sven knows. Is that right? They're going up online after the convention, but I'm not 100% sure when.
And our paper is actually already up in the Kent repository, so you can pick it up from there if you like. So there's a link to that.
Thanks.
Right. Any more questions? Again, if you have more questions about for them, the same for Simon, you can post them in the chat. If you don't ask them now, you can post them in the chat, and then they can follow up with your questions. So for now, we are going to have a short break, and we will continue at 2 p.m. So we have like 8 minutes break, and we will come back.
See you soon.
See you soon.
People are coming back. In case anyone is joining us who wasn't here for the earlier session, I've just posted the link to the symposium schedule for today. So in this next hour session, we have 2 talks. I've been looking forward to both these talks very much. Looking forward to everyone's talks, but these 2 in particular. The second, some thoughts from Joel Pathmore that I think have been brewing for quite some time. And the first talk from Alice Helliwell, who's my colleague at Kent, but we've never met physically, which is thanks to COVID, isn't it? So I'll pass over first to Alice Helliwell for her talk, which is Darwinian Creativity as a Model for Computational Creativity.
Okay. Thank you, Anna. Yeah, it's very strange that we've never met yet. Are in the same institution, potentially on the same campus soon. So yeah, it's all very strange. Let me try and just share my screen so you can see my PowerPoint. Okay, can people see my screen? Is that working? Yeah, okay, great. All right, I'll get started then. Okay, so yeah, thank you again for having me today. I'm going to be talking about Darwinian creativity as a model for computational creativity. So a little bit of background about me. I'm actually a PhD candidate in history and philosophy of art at the University of Kent. So my interest, my doctoral research is about machine creativity and art made by artificial intelligence, but from the sort of philosophical art historical perspective. And this is a piece of work that I did quite a long time ago now, so I'm quite looking forward to revisiting it and having a bit of feedback. So today I'm going to be first going over what Darwinism is and Darwinian creativity, or what those look like. I'm then going to take a look at 2 methods of producing art by artificial intelligences, which is generative adversarial networks and creative adversarial networks. I'm going to look at whether we can apply the Darwinian model to these systems. I'm going to address some potential objections to doing this, and then I'm going to make my sort of overall proposal that Darwinian creativity could potentially be used as an evaluative tool for computational creativity. So Darwinism and Darwinian creativity. I'm sure lots of you are already aware of this, but I'm going to go over it. Obviously, Darwinism was a theory of evolution thought up by Charles Darwin, though it's gone through quite a lot of changes since then. Lots of people have sort of edited it and adapted it. The particular model of evolutionary theory we're looking at today will be the selectionist model. So this is natural selection, not sexual selection, and that's the sort of basis of this Darwinian creativity that I'll be talking about. So the selectionist model is as follows. Mutation occurs, which creates variation in a population. Unfavorable mutations are selected against. Reproduction occurs, which passes on these variations, and then further mutations also occur, which are then selected against, and so on and so on. So to take it to a sort of real life example, imagine you have 2 giraffes, one with a very short neck and one with a very long neck. In cases of sparse food in the environment, the poor short-necked giraffe will die because it can't reach the high leaves on the branches, and the long-necked giraffe will survive enough to be able to reproduce and pass on its long-necked giraffe genes. So this is the model that we're working with. There's variation through mutation and recombination of genes, the selection against the environment, and retention of successful traits through reproduction. So this selectionist model has been applied to lots of other fields, such as evolutionary epistemology, cultural evolution, and behavioral conditioning. And I'm going to be looking at it applied to creativity. So this was first proposed by Campbell in 1960, but it was revisited by Dean Simonton in the 90s, and then again, I think in the late 2000s. And here we have a statement from Simonton on this. Campbell definitely did not predicate his theory of creativity on a direct analogy with organic evolution. On the contrary, he clearly viewed BVSR as a superordinate process that included several manifestations as special cases. The latter included not just biological evolution, but also perception, learning, and creativity. So the idea here is that we don't have to perfectly fit the analogy of evolution, but it's this broader superordinate process that we are looking to model here. So in the case of creativity, Simonton proposes that we need psychologically produced blind variation, selection, which is assessment against the criteria for success, and then retention of successful variations, or blind variation, selection, and retention. So the condition of variation is a little bit controversial in this case. What we're talking about here is variation that must be blind to the selection criteria. So this means there must be an equal likelihood of success of any of the variations being actually successful. It's non-teleological. So we don't know the ultimate goal of the success when we're producing the variation. This doesn't mean that there's any particular mechanism that the variation must occur by, and it also doesn't need to be random. There doesn't need to be an equal likelihood of occurrence of different variations happening. So in the case of evolution, some mutations are more likely to occur because of how genetics works and various things, but it doesn't have to be completely random. So that's what we're working with. There is some support for a Darwinian model of creativity. If you want to read the full list of support, you can look at the original paper by Simonton. The first one that I'm just going to mention quickly is it's been suggested that random priming from environmental stimuli produces a blind variation effect. So think of this as like you're doing a creative task, you go away and do something else, and something in the environment sort of inspires you for your creative problem that you were facing. And this also fits with a lot of anecdotal descriptions of the creative process, particularly inspirationalist accounts like the sort of eureka moment that one might get. So in terms of applying this to computational creativity, so Darwinian creativity was proposed as a potential for computational creativity by Simonton. Of course, lots of researchers have used evolutionary algorithms, genetic algorithms to produce art and that kind of thing. But those are not really what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about whether we could apply this as a tool for evaluation, so not explicitly designed algorithms following an evolutionary model. Margaret Bowden has talked about Darwinian creativity as a potential model for computational creativity. So she suggested that while we would need blind variation, in order to match human creativity, you would also need ideational variation. So that's variation of ideas, not merely just variation within existing rules or constraints. So the model that I'm going to be following then is blind variation, which includes this ideational variation suggested by Bowden, the selection against selection criteria, and then retention of success for traits. So the question I'm trying to answer is, could we use Darwinian creativity to assess computational creativity? The particular examples I'm going to look at are generative adversarial networks and the creative adversarial network. That's because I am, I'm sure lots of you are familiar with GANs and CAN, so this is probably going to be treading a lot of old ground for many people in the room. But to go over briefly, here's some examples from GANs producing these kinds of images. The reason why I'm particularly interested in GANs is because they're really widely used by artists using AI. So here are some examples from an artist called Robbie Barrett. This has got quite a lot of sort of attention and has captured the imagination of some sort of forward-thinking art practitioners and art historians. So in order to evaluate whether I'm going to be able to apply the model of Darwinian creativity, let's have a look at how generative adversarial networks work. So generative adversarial networks are comprised of two systems. We have the generator and the discriminator. The discriminator is trained on a set of training images. So here I've got an example of some artworks from, I think, WikiArt. So these images will be fed into the discriminator, which learns a sort of selection criteria of what it thinks images from the training set are like, or what it thinks human artwork is like. That's the broad category I'm using today. The generator has input from a noise vector, which produces randomness into the system, and then it generates a series of images, such as these ones. Ooh, there you go. These generated images are fed into the discriminator, which has to make a kind of decision. So whether the images it's being presented with fit within the training set, or more broadly, whether they're human art or not. If it thinks they're not, then it's going to give it a low score. And if it thinks that they are from the training set or are human art, it's going to give it a high score. And then that score feeds back into the generator, which uses that to weight the system so sort of favored qualities that are going to be reproduced in future images. The other example that I'm going to look at is very closely related to the GAN system, which is a creative adversarial network that was developed by Elgamel et al. In 2017. I'm sure you've seen this before again. So some example images. And again, this is sort of very much of interest in the art world at the moment. So that works very similarly. We have The generator discriminator is trained on a training set. It has the noise vector, but this time the training set includes style labels, such as these, so artistic style labels. So the discriminator is being trained not just on the images, but also their stylistic labels attached to them. So the generator again produces images. These are fed into the discriminator, but this time there's two decisions made. The first one, whether this is an image potentially from the training set or not. So is it human art or not? If it's not, then it will get rejected, given a low score. If it accepts that, it will then be fed into a second decision, which is whether this image is from an existing style or whether it's stylistically ambiguous. The point being to give a low score to those images that look like they are from an existing art style, and to give a high score to those that look like they are from an ambiguous style. So in this way, the CAN tries to favor developing images that differ from the training set in some way. So how can I apply the Darwinian model to these systems? So I'm going to suggest that the noise vector here provides some random variation. As I said before, it didn't have to be random, but there is some random variation going into the system at the start. The generator cannot access the training set or the discriminator and the sort of selection criteria that goes into the discriminator. So we can say that it's blind. And then the discriminator is doing the selecting. And the weightings that are produced by the scores are a form of retention. So this is why I want to suggest that the generative adversarial network is meeting the Darwinian model of creativity. The same goes for the creative adversarial network, which is very similar. As you can see, there's random variation, selection, retention, and there's a blind process. But I want to also suggest that the creative adversarial network has the potential to provide that ideational variation, because we're seeing that it's aiming to produce images that are different from the styles that it has become familiar with. So that's my sort of suggestion, is that this could be seen as a kind of ideational variation. So what are some potential objections to this? The first potential objection is that this is just merely an analogy. So it doesn't prove anything, doesn't prove that this system is creative. It's just an analogy to this Darwinian process. But I want to suggest that if a model can be applied to both human creativity and computational creativity, it suggests that there may be some functional similarity between the two. So it can have some utility there to help us with evaluating the system. Another objection would be that this Darwinian model creates false positives. We've got non-creative processes that could also meet the terms of this model, this blind variation selection retention model. So I'm going to sort of defend this by saying that this is a problem with the Darwinian theory of creativity generally, and I shall leave it up to them to defend against it. If we accept a Darwinian model of creativity, we could accept that this could be applied to computational creativity as well as human creativity. Otherwise, we've just got to reject it outright. The third charge against this application would be that this is insufficient. So this is somewhat similar. The Darwinian model is insufficient for creativity. It's letting too much in, too many things are counting as creative. So just meeting the model is not enough to show that something is creative. We have already, however, modified this model from Bowden by adding in the ideational variation requirement. And I would like to say that perhaps we can say that the Darwinian model of creativity is something that is necessary to be counted as creative, but it's not sufficient. So we might want to add in additional criteria to sort of assure us that something is really being creative. And then the fourth objection that I wanted to address is one from teleology. So I specifically said that the Darwinian model of creativity was non-teleological. And we could argue that GANs and CANs are goal-directed and therefore are teleological. They are aiming at a certain end. But I would like to suggest that the system is not goal-directed in itself. The goals have come from an external sort of person who's designed this system, and the components themselves are particularly not goal-directed. The generator does not know the aims, and in that sense, it's not goal-directed. It may be trying to sort of optimize the score, but it's not. It doesn't know what it's aiming at when it starts, and that's what makes it blind in the first place. So can we use the Darwinian model of creativity as an evaluative tool? I think that unlike, well, at least in the philosophical literature, a lot of the theories of creativity are very hard to assess against. They're not very clear. They don't sort of give a clear structure of what they're looking for in something, because it just assumes the model of human creativity. So this might provide a standard for systems that blind ideational variation, selection and retention of successful traits. And it could provide some sort of necessary condition for systems to have to meet in order to get past that first barrier to be considered as creative. So that's the end of my talk. So just a quick summary, I went over Darwinism and Darwinian creativity. I had a look at generative and adversarial networks and creative adversarial networks. I showed how we could potentially apply the Darwinian model over these systems which are not explicitly designed to be evolutionary. I addressed a few objections and then concluded with my proposal that Darwinian creativity could be used as a potential evaluative tool for computationally creative systems. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Alice. Excellent. Okay, and we have a little bit of time for questions. Who would like to ask a question? Simon, go ahead.
Sorry, technical stuff. Hi, great talk. Thank you very much. Really got me thinking. So just a couple of clarifications and a question. So by an evaluative tool, I think you covered this at the end, but it doesn't feel like you kind of give a rating or a score or a ranking, but you can give a baseline. If it is possible to characterize this in that way, then you could argue that if you can't, then it's a baseline. No one's ever going to consider it as creative, but if you can, then that's the first hurdle overcome. Is that the way you're looking at this? Yes, yeah. Okay. That is the way I'm sort of thinking of it, yeah. Second thing was, I understand why you've looked at GANs. I'm also using GANs. You're right, they're very cool. They're having an impact on the real art world. But it seems a bit odd that you've not applied this to evolutionary, or maybe you have, as I've not seen the paper, but wouldn't it be also useful to apply it to evolutionary approaches to generative systems? And it'd be fascinating to see if it didn't work. If for some reason, a genetic algorithm didn't pass the criteria for this. Would that be sensible? Yeah, I think it could be applied. I mean, one of the responses I got from reviewers when I originally submitted this paper was that it wouldn't make sense to use this both as a method of sort of designing a system and then evaluating a system. So I sort of tried to de-emphasize a little bit whether you could apply it to something that was already explicitly designed to be evolutionary. That was more the worry. But I don't see why it couldn't be applied in this way to see whether these systems were still meeting up to this Darwinian sort of process of creativity. But that's sort of where my thinking was going there. Just a general point, the reviewers aren't always right, and apologies. Yeah, no. In this room. Fair enough. I coming from the background of sort of philosophy and philosophy of art, I sort of was a bit deferent. I was thinking, oh no, I don't want to sort of show myself up here. So yeah, that was my. It's just for me, you can use evaluation as a driving force. It's missing this bit, so I'll put it in. That's the kind of thing I've done in the past. But I did have a specific question about the creative adversarial networks, which is Elgamal's work, very interesting. You mentioned that could be ideation. To me, it feels like it's not inventing a new style. The idea there is to avoid all previous styles. And that idea came from Elgamal and his team rather than from the software itself. I just wonder whether you could expand on that, why you think that could be ideation in this specific instance. I think in this case, it's more that it goes beyond what a GAN would do, which wouldn't try to vary at all. Whether it meets sort of what Bowden is thinking about when she says ideational, that's sort of up for debate. I think you're right. But I guess what I'm thinking of more is that we're going one step further to getting a bit closer to that kind of varying, not just following what it's already seen, but varying it somewhat. Obviously, we're not getting that kind of creativity going from completely out with the system. It's still fed those same training images. It's still working within a very narrow set of constraints, which you might think is enough to say that it's not ideational variation. Yeah.
I've not really answered you there.
Well, no,
To sort of-
a short paper at the Computational Creativity Conference last year, Sebastian Burns and me, on active divergence. So he surveyed lots of papers, lots of people, artists, using GANs in non-standard ways, and they're doing ideation there. It felt like they could have done ideation by inventing new styles, but they chose to avoid previous styles, which is not quite the same. It wouldn't have been impossible to have extended like that. And you can look at the work of people like Francois Pache, who does style invention in music by doing kind of creoles. So that's kind of merging the Beatles and Brazilian rumba. Yeah, I think that's literally something he creoled together. And even though it wasn't explicitly ideated, there was a new form of music came out of that, and that was using GANs. So it's certainly possible, just not entirely clear that that's what happened with the CAN stuff.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for those things to check out. So something that I would like to look at is similarities between some of these kind of creative adversarial networks or other approaches to try and produce new styles or mixed styles, and comparing them to sort of the aesthetics of what artists have created, because there's been a few art movements which are explicitly trying to sort of mix styles of previous art works. And that's something where I think there might be a case to be made that this is variation enough to count as this ideation variation, but I haven't done much work on that, just sort of conversations with my supervisor. But yeah, thank you, Sam.
Oh, thank you.
As Simon reminds me to mention, originally Francois Pache, who Simon just mentioned, was going to be our keynote speaker. And then COVID happened, and then our schedule got very, very condensed. So we haven't invited him, as you can tell from the schedule, but who knows? Hopefully we can invite him back in a future iteration of the symposium. I'm going to just take advantage of a couple of minutes left to ask Alice. I'm just checking no one else has questions. So I'm intrigued, Alice, as this work, like many of our papers, it was done a year ago. Where have you taken it since? What's happened, apart from COVID?
So actually, I've sort of not done any more work on this specific topic because Darwinian creativity is something that's a bit of a side note in my thesis, because I think that it has a lot of potential to be an avenue for computational creativity. And my thesis as a philosophy thesis is kind of focused on tackling the less sort of amenable to computational systems type theories of creativity, which are really popular in philosophy. It's a very much, we need agency, we need intention, we need all these kinds of very human attributes in order to be creative. So I've spent a lot of time since then working on some really like dense philosophy of mind type stuff, trying to prove that perhaps computational systems can meet these other more stringent requirements. But that's why I was quite interested to revisit this, because I think it's a very interesting theory. So yeah.
Well, maybe we can talk about it if we ever get to meet up on campus sometime.
That would be wonderful. Yes.
And I noticed Joel very much agreeing with you there. Obviously, Joel comes to us from a philosophical background, so maybe we'll switch to Joel now. So Joel Pathmore is giving us a talk on a talk entitled "Will the Real Artist Stand Up? Computational Creativity as Mirror to the Human Soul." Joel, I'll pass over to you.
Thank you. So can everyone hear me fine first?
Yeah.
Good. This paper grew out of an exchange I had with Maggie Bowden on a blog back in 2010. I'm going to offer a prescriptive definition of creativity, how I think we should think about it. And also talk about who qualifies as a creative agent in my regard. I can only hit the highlights, of course, but I would point people to the full paper, which continues to evolve. I am particularly intrigued by the intersection between computational creativity or creativity in general, conceptual agency and consciousness, the ability to reflect on what you have created in this context. So first I'm going to talk about my definition, then who qualifies as a conceptual agency, and finally, briefly, why I think computational creativity is such an important area. And I want to start with this absolutely wonderful quote from Alan Turing in his paper from 1950, Minds and Machines. Consider an atomic pile of less than critical size. An injected idea is to correspond to a neutron entering the pile from without. Each such neuron will cause a certain disturbance, which eventually dies away. If, however, the size of the pile is sufficiently increased, the disturbance caused by such an incoming neuron will very likely go on and on, increasing until the whole pile is destroyed. Is there a corresponding phenomenon for minds, and is there one for machines? There does seem to be one for the human mind. The majority of them seem to be subcritical. A smallish proportion are supercritical. An idea presented to such a mind may give rise to a whole theory consisting of secondary, tertiary, and more remote ideas. I think this captures something abstract about creativity very, very well. And of course, we think of Alan Turing in connection with his work in breaking the German cryptography. He had a hand, of course, in building one of the first digital computing machines. But I think he also should be seen as one of the early pioneers in talking about computational creativity. Much of his seminal paper in Mind is addressing the nature of creativity, which he absolutely saw as being key to human intelligence. And I want to agree with him there. So let me begin with a definition for computational creativity, which I freely borrow here from Simon Colton and Brain Wiggins. Computational creativity is the philosophy, science, and engineering of computational systems, which, by taking on particular responsibilities, exhibit behaviors that unbiased observers would deem to be creative. I want to add a few caveats to that. First of all, I think that computational creativity, if it is real, is critically dependent on creativity in general. I take that as non-controversial. You don't want to rule any class of putative agents either in or out a priori. And I absolutely don't want to be ruling out the possibility of artifactual creative agents. Indeed, I think they are very conceivable. They're likely to be possible at some point in the future. Human beings provide our most paradigmatic example of creativity to date, absolutely. But, and I take this point very much from discussions I've had with Blay Whitby, one neither wants to be seen to be favoring nor handicapping any of those other groups than human beings. We don't want to have an overly anthropocentric perspective. And a final caveat I want to add, and this is going to be more controversial, I think that researchers should respect the general usage of words when giving them technical meanings. I don't think that we can ever leave behind the general usage. This is a point I take very much from Jordan Zlatov, who's a lecturer in linguistics at University of Lund. So there's a curious divide I find in discussions about computational creativity. On the one hand, there are those who would deny that computational systems or artifactual agents could ever be creative, even in principle. And here I have in mind someone like Jordan Zlatov, whom I worked with in the Center for Cognitive Semiotics at the University of Lund. So Zlatov would say that living beings are distinguished by their possession of intrinsic value. I agree. Certain organisms distinguish themselves by their capacity to create meaning for themselves. Again, I agree very much with Zlatov there. And artifacts, Zlatov would say, at least as people commonly think of them, cannot even in principle be considered alive. And that I would generally agree with him on. Although I think Zlatov really wants to rule out the possibility of artifactual agents being creative at any conceivable point in the future. And there I think he's just wrong. So that's the one hand. And on the other hand, you have those who would insist that not only can creative computational systems be found today, but they already exist. All that creativity requires, and I take this quote from Maggie Bowden, is the ability to come up with ideas or artifacts that are new, surprising, or valuable. If you look at creativity that way, then computers and computer programs have clearly done this. Therefore, Maggie would say it is pure bias to claim that they aren't already being creative. So I want to offer a working definition of creativity, and it is going to be a prescriptive definition. I can only give you some hints as to why I think you should accept it, with more details in the paper. And that definition is the following. Creativity is the at least partly yet never fully intentional act of an intentional agent or agents recombining elements of past or present experience in more or less strikingly novel ways to yield insights from the subtle to the life or world altering or more immediate practical benefits. So I will go step by step through this definition. The at least partly intentional. What do I mean by that? Well, I want to say that unlike serendipity, creativity, at least as I'm thinking about it here, does not come about by accident. It can't be the product of random chance, although chance may certainly play a key role. It requires, furthermore, someone trying to be making meaning for herself, someone trying to be creative. Ergo, it's not just the product that counts, contra what many in the computational creativity community would say, but the process by which it is produced. So, all right, little problem with my mouse. There we go. Yet never fully intentional. What do I mean by yet never fully intentional? Well, creativity cannot be forced, I think. One cannot simply decide to be creative, at least most of the time. That doesn't work. And hence we have the well-known phenomenon of writer's block or artist's block. The at least partly yet never fully intentional act. What do I mean by act? The creative agent must do something, must produce something. It need not be anything observable by other agents. It could be the production of an unspoken idea. It has to be observable by the creative agent herself. And just a passing note, the creative act cannot be ever strictly instantaneous. Acts play out over some amount of time, however short it might be. It's not just popping into sudden existence. The at least partly yet never fully intentional act of an intentional agent or agents. The agent here can be operating alone or collectively. You can have individual or collective creativity. It does not matter in my regard if the agent is artificially constructed or naturally produced. But the creative agent must be the sort of agent who can operate with reflective, conscious intent. The agent has to be able to recognize herself as a conscious agent. I'll talk more about that. An agent lacking such capacity can certainly produce something that looks creative, but the creativity, if any, will not, I want to argue, be located in that agent. It will be found elsewhere. Recombining elements of past or present experience. Like imagination, creativity does not come out of nowhere, despite occasional appearances to the contrary. This definition emphasizes what Maggie sees as only one type of creativity, unfamiliar combinations of familiar ideas, as she puts it, at the expense of the other two that she mentions, exploratory creativity and transformational creativity. What she sees as separate phenomena, I see as different aspects of the same phenomenon, where the cornerstone really is the recombinatory aspect of creativity. Recombining elements of past or present experience in more or less strikingly novel ways to yield insights from the subtle to the life or world altering. Creativity comes in degrees. I think that's non-controversial, both in terms of how it is viewed at the time of the creative act and how it is viewed looking back at the creative act. So for example, the true significance of Johannes Kepler's creative improvements on Tycho Brahe's models of the solar system, and I think they were tremendously creative in their inspiration, in their execution, were not immediately apparent even to him. Yet they came to play an absolutely critical role in the establishment of Nicholas Copernicus's model as the accepted one in science, and really led to a huge explosion of creativity in Enlightenment science. Then more immediate practical benefit. Just because the benefit is immediate and practical does not make the creative act any less creative. A newly written haiku may lift its author from her depression, for example. A new kind of hook may serve no greater purpose than allowing one particular picture to hang on one particular wall. Even the smallest acts of creativity have a transformational role to play. What I don't want to address with this definition, what isn't addressed with the definition, is Maggie's distinction between P creativity or psychological creativity and H creativity or historical creativity, where P creativity is new only for the creative agent and H creativity is new for anyone, anywhere up to the present time. The distinction poses two major problems as I see it. How does one determine what is new for anyone, anywhere, anywhen? And is anything ever truly entirely new? Does anything ever just come out of nowhere? What else am I omitting here deliberately from the definition? Well, the definition is agnostic about the possibility of there being different kinds of creativity, and it makes no attempt to set out criteria for judging different levels of creativity. It only attempts to set out a minimum threshold for saying that here is creativity, here is a creative agent. So who qualifies as a creative agent on this account? I've given you some hints already. I want to start though with two quotes. This one from Maggie again. Creativity is not a special talent possessed only of a fortunate elite. On the contrary, it is an unavoidable aspect of normal intelligence. And I think that's absolutely key to how I understand intelligence as well. And this quote from Alan Turing: "We live to believe that man is in some subtle way superior to the rest of creation. It is best if he can be shown to be necessarily superior, for then there is no danger of him losing his commanding position." So I've suggested already that creative agency requires consciousness, and not just consciousness, but reflective consciousness. Not just a bare conscious awareness, but a conscious awareness of conscious awareness. In particular, the creative agent on this account must be able to recognize herself as a creative agent and somehow able to communicate herself as such. Furthermore, the creative agent must not be just consciously aware of what she is doing in a bare conscious sort of way, but as I say, consciously aware of being consciously aware. Who's ruled out? Well, a range of other species, certainly. Newborn human infants, almost certainly, at least probably. Artifactual agents like Harold Cohen's Aaron, yes, with apologies to Maggie. Indeed, seemingly all existent artifacts. But I absolutely don't want to rule out future artifacts. In fact, I think they may well be coming along. Notably, as with creativity, a number of computational creations have been claimed to be to some degree conscious. And I wrote a paper with Blay Whitby addressing these claims, saying that really the claims of consciousness were overstated. And I want to take a similar line with people who are pushing a little too hard for claiming that existing systems existing computational systems are independently creative. There's something I call the artifactual question, which I raised with Blay Whitby in that paper. And that's how should consciousness or moral agency, or we don't really touch on it directly in that paper, but creativity, be understood in artifactual as opposed to natural agents. And we argue in that paper that it does not matter of itself how the agent is constructed or how that agent works inside, so long as there is no measurable difference in any substantive way from an agent who would be taken to be a self-conscious agent. And in the context of the paper, we were talking about moral agents, in the context here, creative agents. And furthermore, the agent should display full autonomy. There should be no indication that the agent's actions and responses are being dictated by any external agency, as with the mechanical Turk of the 19th century, who appeared to play chess. My inspiration for both this current paper and the earlier one with Blay comes from Jordanous, whom I mentioned earlier, his idea of a semiotic hierarchy, which itself is offering a prescriptive account of how Zlotov thinks that we should think about things like consciousness, language, sign usage. He offers his account as a way to rescue researchers from what he considers their own implicit assumptions tied up in their choice of language. And I want to agree very strongly with him there. We can't ever really move away from the assumptions that are in the general usage of terms when we try to redefine terms with specialized meanings. He understands meaning and meaning making as taking place on at least 5 different levels, where each level builds upon and depends critically upon the previous levels, where the base layer is life, then subjective experience, intersubjective experience, sign function, and language. With respect to this paper, and he says that intentionality is fundamental to consciousness and phenomenology is key to understanding meaning. I agree very strongly with him there. How it applies to this paper, creativity does not require language, witness creative pre-linguistic children, but it does require an ability to communicate, which implies at least some minimum command of the sign function. At least I don't know how to make sense of creativity that cannot even in principle be intentionally created. So creativity, as I'm presenting it here, really at base level requires life. And a quote here from Paul Brown, which I think is really beautiful, talking about the signature of life. A key problem is that of signature. At what point can we claim that an artwork has its own distinct signature? I suggested that using a symbolic language to initiate a process would distance me far enough from the output of that process for it to have the potential of developing its own intrinsic qualities, including a unique signature. By the 1990s, it had become obvious that this approach had failed. Complementary research in many fields had demonstrated that the signatures of life were robust and strongly relativistic. At the time he wrote that, he was involved in a project called Drawbots. I don't think Drawbots was ultimately any more successful than his earlier efforts actually at producing artifactual agency, the creative agency. But that's a further discussion for later. Now, the problem I see, before I close here, the problem I see with focusing too much on the question of whether current artifacts are creative, whether independently creative, whether current artifacts are independently creative agents, is that we miss the tremendous transformational effect that digital computers have had on human creativity over the last half century. Consider that in the year that I was born, computers inspired the creation of the first Moog synthesizer. The first Moog synthesizer filled an entire room. By the time I was in junior high school, we had a mini Moog synthesizer that was a small keyboard that we could use with the band. Late 1960s, you had the birth of the internet, tremendous creative exchange between universities, and computers provided the first detailed models of supernovas. allowing creative thinking about the nature of supernovas on a level that was not possible before. In 1976, the first computer proof of something that could not be proven by human means alone, verifying the four-color theorem. The early 1990s, the birth of the Internet of Things, taking the internet to a whole new level. So what are my take-home messages here before I close? I really think that we should be looking more at Alan Turing as one of the pioneers of computational creativity. And not only for seeing the connection between creativity and intelligence and computational systems, but also seeing the necessary role of living systems. Of course, Turing, toward the end of his life, was very much engaged in research in biology, and I think that was part of his inspiration there. Researchers, as I said at the beginning, should avoid, I think, redefining terms in ways that depart too far from their common usage. I don't think we can ever get away from the assumptions that are buried in those words, and they can really distort our meanings without our intending that to happen. I've tried to offer a prescriptive definition that is that if properly defended, can do much to clarify discussion, and debating whether existing artifacts are creative risks missing the hugely transformational effect that computers have had on creativity. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joel. We have a question from Sven in the chat. I might just read out for Sven. Does the definition of who is creative and requiring meta-consciousness also remove a larger number of human artists of the past?
I don't think so. Now, yeah, we'd have to go into specific examples to see why you might worry about that. Yes, I am wanting to hold very keenly to the idea that the creative agent needs to be able to recognize herself as doing something creative, and needs to be able to, furthermore, to communicate that somehow, by no means necessarily in language. And I don't think that does exclude anybody that I would want to think of as creative, but it would, for example, exclude newborn babies being creative. And that's an interesting discussion to be had.
Sven, did you want to come back, and then I'll go to Alice and Simon?
Yeah. But this is mostly a post-rationalization. So when you look at artists of the past, they can't defend their stance. So if you go back to, for example, what we see as cavemen's art or prehistoric art, we have no understanding if they believed that they were doing either documentation or creative exploration. And this is like going far back. But if you look at monkeys and gaunt apes, they do also have playful engagement, which goes into the realm of creative exploration and expression. So this is where I think it's a bit, difficult.
Yeah, I think both those groups, there are very good reasons to think that they have reflective conscious awareness. And I think you can see that in the cave art. I think you can see that in the play of monkeys and great apes. Defending that would take a bit more consideration.
Okay, let's. We're running a little out of time, but I'd like to get Alice's question, and then Simon.
Thank you. Yeah, that was really interesting, Joel. I just wanted, I guess it's more of a clarification maybe of your motivation for including consciousness as a requirement. So like where is that coming from? Is that because of intention, that you think intention is essential? Is that where that sort of the logic has come through in that? Yeah, I think you might have covered it quickly, but yeah.
It was very quickly. I'm interested in what I see as the intersection between conceptual agency, consciousness, and creative agency, because I've previously in my work described consciousness and conceptual agency as two sides of a coin. Here, I want to suggest that you really have a three-sided coin. between consciousness, conceptual agency, and creativity, where consciousness and conceptual agency are really at heart creative acts.
Thank you.
And Simon?
Hi, John. Thank you. Very interesting talk. I'd like to have a response to it, and if you would like a response to my response, if you like, that'd be great. So you mentioned the definition that Geraint Wiggins and I came up with for computational creativity, and it might interest to know that we did that on a flight to Dublin with a mini bottle of wine in front of each other, in front of ourselves.
Excellent.
And yeah, most of the discussion was about this question of humanity in the definition. So originally, it was far more human-centric, and I think I won the argument in trying to wash that out. So things like unbiased observers is kind of, that could be a computer or it could be a person. So that's got rid of the humanity there. And the other big thing was deemed to be creative. So you can deem something to be creative even though you wouldn't think it was creative in a person. And that was originally deemed to be creative in people, because that came from previous definitions. Basically, computers have to be creative in the same way that people do. And I argued that that was limiting. So
well, I mean, on that last point, I absolutely agree.
Well, so, and I want to take that further with this response. It won't take very long. I'm sorry, Anna.
If you need to take a break, then do take a little screen break, because we've got a little break coming up before the next session. But carry on, Simon. Sorry.
Okay, sure. So this guy, Aaron Hertzman, has written something similar recently, why computers can't be artists. And he's very resolute in that. And I've broken down his argument. And basically what he's doing is put up 3 barriers to entry. So he wants computers to have full general intelligence, be as smart as us. He wants them to be conscious. This is always coming up. And he also wants them to be accepted as people in society. I mean, these are 3 fundamental things which, basically are removing any chance that computers can be considered artists for, the whole of the rest of my life easily. So I call them barriers to entry because you have to change the fundamental nature of a computer in order to get it in. And in human terms, it'd be like saying you have to change the color of your skin to be considered creative. And there's very little to argue in that case because it's a stupid argument. But it feels to me like this is just gatekeeping, and it always has been. And consciousness in particular is a very, it's always there. And I just don't understand why consciousness is a prerequisite for creativity. It's weird seeing all these systems, especially with the deep learning wave, obviously creating great artifacts, but not being creative. There's a dissociation from creating something and being creative. And so I often think that, the biggest problem is the fact that we always constantly only talk about human creativity when we're talking about computer creativity. Okay. And really, it would be better to have a new word. I could call it ABC-ativity because of the behind you. And we use that word to describe whatever the hell it is that computers do, which leads to these wonderful creations, and just stick with that and say, and it doesn't have to be anything to do with human creativity. But the problem with that would be I would spend the rest of my life explaining, yeah, we do mean creativity to everybody other than philosophers and social scientists. So I just put it out there that unless we deviate from thinking about computational creativity purely in human terms, then we're never going to get to the stage where anyone will agree that software is being creative.
Couple of quick responses since we're running out of time. I absolutely agree that we need to move away from thinking of it in overly human terms. And I'm trying to do that here. The prediction that creative systems, creative conscious systems, such as I'm imagining, won't happen in my lifetime. I think I'm an optimist, maybe. I think it's completely unpredictable if and when they will come along. They might be tomorrow, they might be 500 years from now. I don't want to guess. Yes, these systems that we're building now are producing input that is appropriately deemed creative. I just want to suggest that the creativity isn't necessarily in the system itself, at least independently of the observer. And also that by focusing too much on calling these systems creative or worrying about whether or not they are creative, we lose something profoundly important about the transformational role that these systems have had on our creativity in art, in science, in so many fields.
Well, they obviously have, but I don't see why opening our hearts and minds to the idea that software could be called creative would undermine the idea that they've massively enhanced human creativity.
I'm going to interrupt. I'm sorry. Otherwise, we'll have no break.
Sure.
And I had a feeling you two might carry on until the end of the session if I didn't stop you. So let's have a little break. We'll come back to the session at 3 o'clock UK time. See everyone then.
Thanks, Ellen.
Right, I've had a little break, hopefully, and recharged a bit. Got top-ups on tea. Now for something completely different. I'm very, very happy to introduce my co-organizer, my lead organizer for today, Juan Alvarado. Juan's going to be presenting a paper that is based on his doctoral work supervised by Garrett Wiggins. This is a paper entitled Assessing Creativity of Mexica, never pronounce it right, an application of Ritchie's criteria. So I'll hand over to Juan now.
Thank you. Let me share my screen. Right. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, good. So I cannot see anything else, but I will start. So this is my the paper we are presenting here. We are assessing the creativity of Mexica. It's computer system for the generation of narratives. And for that, for this assessment of the creativity of Mexica, we are using Ritchie's criteria. This is what we are presenting here. The main objective of this is to use the evaluation using this process of using Ritchie's criteria to inform the system about the thing that might be good to change in order to produce something better in the process. So Ritchie proposed this criteria to evaluate creativity of computer systems in terms of the outputs they produce. So one thing he says is the first topic he introduces when he presents this criteria is that the inner process of the system is not an important part of this assessment, of this evaluation, because it is not an observable factor in the creation of the artifact. He says this because it happens the same with humans, as he explains. We cannot see what are the inner workings of a person producing something. We can only see what they have produced, the objects, the piece of art they have produced, the painting, the joke, the stories, those things. And those are the things that we can see from a person, and same things we can see from a system. So we only have to use this output, the observable things that we can see in the creative process. So he uses this R to identify this output of the system, and so he proposes this criteria. I agree with the part that we need to check the outputs and the properties they have, but I also think there is something that we should look into the inner process of the system to evaluate the creativity it has. But it's a different thing. In this case, we're using the criteria, this criteria he proposes, and he uses the output. But he also uses the inspiring set. He has this concept of the inspiring set, which is the set of elements, the set of artifacts the system knows from before, and they are examples the system can use to produce new ones. So it's in the example of Mexica, the inspiring set is a number of the stories that Mexica knows from before. It's a database of stories, and so Mexica uses them to produce new stories. Now, Ritchie proposes in this for this criteria, we need to understand basic properties, the essential properties that we need to observe in the output of the systems. And those are novelty, quality, and typicality. They are important and they have been pointed out before. So for example, novelty is a very important property that many people have pointed out, and is about this artifact produced is different from the examples that we have seen before. So it's a degree of novelty. And this is something I'm going to talk about a little bit more. Quality, I mean, in the sense of evaluating the novelty. Quality is the property that we can see in these artifacts produced, giving them a value. They are maybe good for me, not good for me, they are rubbish. We can have a quality value to the items produced, the artifacts produced by the system or the creator, because in this case, it could be not only a system, it could be also a person. And we also have the typicality, which is the extent to what this item belongs to an artifact class. So it belongs to a particular class of artifacts. So then it's like it's the membership of this artifact to this class of artifacts. And we can say, for example, this thing the system produced, it's very similar to, because of the characteristics, the properties it has, it's very similar to a story, to a joke, to a painting, so because of the properties it has. So we can explore those kind of things. So the three characteristics here, they are properties that we can evaluate. And they should be evaluated in terms of Ritchie, they should be evaluated by humans. That is one thing he says. This criteria is meant to be used by humans. They can assess these kind of things, and then we can say the output of this creator is creative, and therefore we can say the creator can be deemed creative. It can be a person or a system. For the elaboration of these criteria, he uses a notation that we can, I'm going to explain a little bit in order to explain the criteria he has. So he has this notation, for example, the first one is the subset of from an set X that falls in the range of typicality. So the notation he uses is that we have this typicality here, this thing in the range of alpha and beta, and we are using this set of outputs. It could be any other set, but we could use a set of elements that we want to test the typicality. And they, of course, we have the definition here. We apply this typicality function to a given element in the set. So this is the element in the set we're testing. It belongs to this set, and we can assess the membership of this item that we are testing, we are evaluating, to that based on that typicality and based on these alpha and beta values. So very similar, we have the subset of X falling in a range of quality. So we said the same thing, but instead of using typicality, we use the value function. So we have an item and we assess the value. We will evaluate this quality for the items, and we can see if it falls in the range of between alpha and beta, and then we have this subset of elements falling in this range of quality. Then we also have the average value of those items in taking into account one function f in a set of elements. So this is very simple. The average value taking into account this function. The function could be typicality or it could be value, any of this, typicality or value. We can use any of them, and we can find the average value for typicality in a given set, and we can find like the addition, we have this summation of all the values and we divide them. We have the approach. It's very simple. And then we have the relative sizes of two sets. We want to know the ratio between one set and the other to understand, to find out the relative sizes and find out about the output of this creative system. With these things, Richie developed these criteria, and we have this. For example, this is the 18 criteria he proposes. This is one page, the other page. So the first one, for example, has the average function that we saw before, and I said before we can use a function. In this case, we are using typicality, and so basically what this one does is we are evaluating, or we are getting the average value for the typicality function in the output set. That is what we are doing. So we take the whole output of the system, the whole thing, we evaluate the typicality, and we want to know the average value of that typicality. Then he also uses this, well, not the theta value, to compare if this assessment has passed a given threshold. So it has like a pass or not pass property for each one of them. So the second one, another example, we have the ratio we are comparing. We need two sets. We need this is the first one of them. We are using the typicality function with a given alpha value. This is the lower limit, and the upper limit is 1. 1 is the highest membership of for an item to a given class of artifacts. So we have these. They are the typical artifacts that we are subsetting, and then we are comparing against the outputs of the system. So we want to have to know the ratio, how big is the subset of elements which are typical in the elements that the system has produced, for example, and so on. So for example, you can see the number 3 is very similar to the first one, but instead of typicality, we use the value, right? And then we can have more elaborated expressions. We are not going to explain them in detail, but you see this criteria uses these properties and combines them in different ways, using the output in some cases, and using also the inspiring set in other cases. As you can see in the criterion number 9, he uses the inspiring set to understand the intersection between the outputs and the inspiring set, the things that the system or the creator is copying from the inspiring set, for example, maybe, which in opinion of Richie is not a bad thing. And we have 18 criteria. So we're using all these things. I wanted to explain this because of the results I have here. So we're using these things because we are assessing the creativity of Mexica using this using this criteria. So we have Mexica. Mexica is a system that generates stories. He has been built using these ideas of Sharples. He has these ideas of a writer, not a system, a human writer who has these two different stages, engagement and reflection. And during engagement, the writer generates content, like free content in the story. And then in reflection, the writer goes back to the material generated so far, and it applies some modifications. He can fix some things here and there and so on. And so then Perez presents this computational model of this engagement and reflection model and implements this model in Mexica. So it has the same notion of engagement and reflection cycle stages, and the system produces a story using these two stages. During engagement, Mexica generates a sequence of actions based on the story context. So it has the action or a set of actions. On those actions generate a context. Then the context is used to say okay, based on this context, I can put this new action in the story in progress, and then that generates a new story context, and then it continues adding new actions to the story. And in reflection, it verifies the story. It verifies if the story is well organized, if it is coherent, if it is interesting, and those kind of things. And then it fixes the story if it needs to be fixed, and then it goes back to engagement. For all this, it uses a set of constraints. Those constraints come from the inspiring set, the action the system can use, and the parameters the users can set in the parameters of the system. So we have a bunch of things in Mexica. We are not going to we are not going into the detail of Mexica, but we are going into the detail of the results. These are the results that we have got from applying these rigid criteria to the outputs of Mexica using different parameters, alpha, beta, and gamma, because there are some combinations. But you can see from the results, it's not very easy to see things. But one thing, for example, here is the first criterion. It has the same result no matter what are the values that we're using. The third one as well is the same thing, and it's a low value. If you can see, it's a 0.3 something. And if you remember, the criterion one was about the typicality. So Mexica is very well constructed to produce typical examples of what it produces. But it's not very well producing good results. If you remember criterion 3, it's about quality. For this, we are taking into account the information Mexica gives about itself and the evaluation it makes about itself says that the things it produces are not very good in average. That is what the system says. So we have this result. Another important result is that from criterion 6 to criterion 8A, the results are 0. And that happens because, let me go back to these criterions. These criterions use this quality property. They should be high quality. That we have a gamma and 1. They should be high quality in the output, and the intersection with non-typical. This means non-typical. We start from the 0 to beta, so they are non-typical examples in the output. But Mexica does not generate non-typical examples, and therefore there is no intersection between the non-typical and high-quality examples, and that's why the result in Mexica for those criterion 6, 7, 8, and criteria 6, 7, 8, and 8A, it's 0. So it's an ill-defined way to it's a problem with Mexica. It cannot generate something which is untypical and explore a conceptual space, artifacts outside the conceptual space. So more results, as you can see. You can check more detail in the paper, but I summarized these results in the paper, and I explained in what I have said here. Typicality is a thing that Mexica manages very well, but quality is not very well managed, and in general, it doesn't generate untypical examples. So to evaluate these kind of things and to generate stories, we are using the inspiring set of 20 stories published by Perez in the book 20 Years, 20 Stories. They are supposed to be good stories, well organized, interesting, all that. And we are taking that assumption. Of course, we are using them in the inspiring set, and we could say maybe they are not interesting and maybe they are not that good. But we should apply some other evaluation to those stories, as the same we are using for the outputs. And the description of the problems that we have found here. And in the end, we're using this to inform the system, to inform Mexica of the things it can change. And for that, we are producing a different system to interact with Mexica and change the parameters it uses to produce a different output the next time it executes and produces an output. So that's why we are doing this. And this is what we are have here. And yeah, these are the references that we are using, and that's from me.
Thank you, Juan.
Thank you.
So we've got 5 minutes for questions. Simon.
Hi, Juan. Thank you for that. So coincidentally, Michael Cook and I are delivering a brand new course on computational creativity right now. And this week we covered evaluation in the lectures, and we covered Anna Contesalo's work, A.K.Jordanous' work, our own contributions, and of course, Graham Ritchie's work. And we set this a tutorial question just yesterday to the students. And I'll kind of phrase it similar to you. It's not meant to be aggressive. It's just a real question, because Graham talks about the measures that he's got in terms of creativity. And I've always worried about that. You can use them to assess whether version 1 of Machika is better than version 2 in terms of the quality of the output, which is fine, but I don't think they're at all appropriate for creativity. And so the question would be, imagine that version 11.3 of Machika that Raphael puts out next year is amazing. I mean, the stories are just quantifiably better. You know, they're more novel, they're more typical. And then, you know, a few weeks later, it's revealed that, and so in terms of Graham's Ritchie's criteria, it looks fantastically creative because it satisfies all of the criteria. And then it turns out that Raphael has basically written all the stories himself and written one line of code to go off and find them, or they found a database of appropriate stories. And then you'd have to reassess your evaluation of creativity. Would you agree with that? Because the software is one line now to retrieve a piece and show it, even though it's maxed out Graham Ritchie's criteria. And I guess my question would be is, given that we have access to Machika, we can see the code, we can read the papers, why not also consider, in addition to the quality of the output, why not also consider the process? That's my question, I guess.
Right. Thank you. Yeah, it's a very good question. And you're right. We are not considering the process, only the output. And if the code changes and it's one line, and we have no way to know to find out that. And we need to reassess the evaluation, as you said. We rely on these to have a kind of a clue of the creative process, but it's only a partial knowledge about the whole thing. Now we need to look in the internal process, and that's why we need these values to inform the process of the things the system has generated to create new ones, but using this knowledge to improve the performance of Machika. Of course, the problem could be the same thing, because if we don't know the inner working of Machika, we might be informing something to a hard-coded version of Machika, and it would be useless.
So the overall purpose of the project, this part of your project, is to basically inform Raphael and the other authors of Machika where it's falling down according to these well-defined rules, and give them motivation or inspiration to improve matters. Is that, rather than assessing whether it's fair to call it creative or not? Am I right in saying that? I struggle without seeing the papers. I don't get all the rest of the context. I would love to have had the papers.
I understand. Yeah, the purpose is to have this evaluation, use these results to inform the system. So for that, we are making a new system, and a system outside of Machika. This one gets the results, it applies the Ritchie's criteria, and then this one modifies the parameters, the input parameters of Machika, and then it starts execution of Machika, and then it again can check the outputs and apply these Ritchie's criteria, again, see what didn't work, what worked, and modify accordingly to produce something different. Maybe not better, but different. Or but the purpose is to produce something better every time.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks both. I have some musings in my head at the moment about Graham Ritchie's criteria, but I think I'm going to save them for an ICCC short paper, so you might have to wait till then. I'm starting to rethink my opinions about Ritchie's criteria, having destroyed them in various papers in the past. So it's very interesting to see the application of them still and see how they're useful and how they're not. So I think we'll hand over to our next speaker now. So our next speaker is our first show and tell demo speaker. So this is Phil Wick, and this is work with Tony Veal. And the title of our show and tell demo, our first show and tell demo of the afternoon, is Walk the Line, Digital Storytelling as Embodied Spatial Performance. So Phil, I'll hand over to you now.
Yeah, can you hear me all right?
That's fine, yeah.
And you can see my screen?
I can see your screen.
Perfect, thank you. All right. Yes, thanks everyone, and thank you for organizing this symposium. Yes, so initially this submission was a show and tell demo, but since we've been locked out our offices with access to our robots for nearly a year and a half now, it wasn't really feasible to give a live demo on my video feed or anything. I just have a bunch of videos that I might be able to share. And also since then, my research had to sort of like naturally change its way because any sort of human user studies or anything like that wasn't possible anymore, unfortunately. Okay, so I'll be presenting research on digital storytelling as embodied spatial performance. And I'll just start right there. So this is part of my doctoral thesis on robotic performances, especially in the context of storytelling and automated storytelling. Just to verify, do you see the speaker? Do you see anything apart from my slides?
So I see just the slide at the moment. Oh, no, I can see your cursor in the top left, top right.
All right. Okay. Because I can see you and it's blocking the screen, but that's all right. Okay. Yes. So I will be talking about embodied automated storytelling. So what that means on one part is the embodiment, which in the case of automated storytelling, we'll be using a robot to do the storytelling. And on the side of the storytelling, we'll be using a storytelling system developed mostly by my supervisor, the Scalextric storytelling system. So these are the two components that we're trying to connect. So on the one hand, we have this sort of like well-defined story generation system. And on the other hand, we have this less well-defined embodied system that we try to connect with it. So give an overview of the storytelling system. We're using Scalextric, and it's a knowledge-based system for generating plots and then rendering them in idiomatic English texts. So I have here an example of one of these stories. So this is the story of how you killed John, gave John a passionate kiss, but John rejected your proposition. So you debated hard and long with John. John no longer felt well disposed towards you. As a result, you choked the air out of John. So you can see that the structure of these stories follows a very simplistic pattern. So the underlying algorithm is matching one action with an appropriate reaction of between two characters, and those characters are meaningfully connected with the actions. So you have the actions corresponding to the characters, and also the connection between those actions are causally connected. So this is sort of like the very symbolic underlying story generation that we've started out using. And then the approach was, okay, we want to bring this onto the stage. We want to have some form of embodied storytelling. And for this, I've been working in particular with a Now robot, and I focused on nonverbal communication. So that means this research focused on the use of gestures and space to augment text beyond written and verbal language, right? Because we know that from storytellers, it's one thing if you just simply read text, and then you have a real storyteller who's using their voice, their gestures, and space to convey a story in a almost completely different experience. So I have to say that this research excludes facial expressions and gaze on the one hand, because the now does not provide these modalities. On the other hand, because gestures and space is already such a broad domain that this is the focus of this study. So if we look at this nonverbal communication using gestures and space, first, if we look at gestures, they're all different kinds of gestures: iconic gestures, metaphoric gestures, beats, and so forth. And then we have aspects in the realm of space, like locomotion, moving, rotating, and so forth. And then if you mix them, you can derive something like pantomime, which is literally translating a certain action to very specific iconic movement. And all of this has this idea of how well does it generalize for any other action or situation that occurs. And so we have a cultural dependence as well, as much as a contextual dependence of those gestures or movements. So the question was, when we started looking into that, what is the communicative intent of certain gestures or certain movements? And for this, we looked at a different form of storytelling. Some of you might be familiar with these experimental studies by Heider and Zimmer from 1944, in which they simply showed shapes moving on a screen in a certain schematic fashion. And then observers were asked to just describe what they see. And most participants of the study all immediately start attributing character traits and invent a story that narrates what they're seeing on the screen, even though it's just simply arbitrary shapes moving on the screen. So it's the user bringing his intentions through the schematics movement. And we took this idea from there and looked at image schemas. So this is also a concept from cognitive linguistics. Right? So image schemas are thought to be these repeating structures of cognitive processes shaped by our bodily interaction with the physical environment. So just to give an example, the underlying assumption here, I referenced Johnson, who wrote extensively about that, is any entity or human that lives in the physical world is able to perceive gravity, and hence there is a inherent understanding of the concept of up and down. At the same way, we have a depth perception, which allows us to be able to understand what is meant with near and far, even though we not necessarily need to agree on a specific word for that. And then the hypothesis goes a bit further to claim that when we can find those structures in language, which we can in fact do, right? So there's this evidence that this is also, there's a lot of metaphorical use of image schemas in language. So if I say she finally came out of her depression, then the depression is thought of as a form of container from which you can leave or fall into a certain container. Same with fall in love is also to sort of like have this metaphorical container that you can enter. So this is like a very fundamental schematic way of thinking, speaking, and then also thinking, as it is claimed. And we thought like that these schematics in space can also be reflected in the movement in space. So the most basic assumption that we derived for this paper was, okay, we have those two robots, those two characters in a story, and within the story, the two characters in the story have a certain development. So sometimes, and this is where it becomes hopefully becomes more obvious, say character A and B are getting closer together because they're falling in love, right? So, and this getting closer together can then be mapped to the physical domain in which those two robots are actually coming together. And the same way they can distance themselves if a negative action occurs, right? And this also speaks about proxemics, right? At what point are two robots or two actors, in that case, too close to one another? And how is the perception of these stories influenced by, let's say, coherent use of space? That is, when the actual movement corresponds in a metaphorical way to the character development or incoherent use of space, where it's rather arbitrary how the robots are moving. So that was the first kind of assumption for that paper. And it quickly also took over to gestures. Here I have a few little videos to make up for the lack of a real robot. So there is empirical evidence by gesture research that suggests that these image schemas can be found in human gestures, right? So when we are gesturing, we are also we can also identify these image schematic patterns and force gestalts in our movement. So we can use those insights from gesture studies and we can implement them into our robots, make certain gestures that that originate from these very schematic underpinnings. And here's an example. So on the left side, you can see a generated story, right? So this is just one of the stories. I'm just going to quickly read it. What if Boris Johnson fell in love with Theresa May? Something clicked in Boris when confident Theresa came along. And then one actor, you're as appealing as a monster truck, right? So you can also see Tony's influence in working on computational humor here, of course. So this, the annotations that you can see here that I marked with closer, because we are working with a symbolic system, we have direct access to the semantics of certain actions, and we can just simply label those actions that bring characters closer together or further apart, just for the sake of testing our hypothesis. So in that case, we identified the schematic of getting closer together, and then further down, if there's something like study under, that can be linked to the schematic of under, and the gesture can also be chosen appropriately. So what we've done from this, so this is basically the schematic view of the schematic approach. So on the bottom layer, we would have our storytelling system from which we can retrieve our story actions. Those can then be linked to image schemas. And from those, we can derive appropriate gestures or coherent gestures and coherent spatial movement. A similar approach has also been done by other researchers for virtual gestures. And the degree of which how to choose those image schemas varies from the system. So since we're using a symbolic approach, we can actually have full control over our conditions by linking image schemas directly with those actions. And right, this is just another example. On the right-hand side, you can also see the spatial movement with the two robots playing out. So you can see the robots. I had to speed up the video because it's rather slow with those two robots. And on the left-hand side, you can see those schematics being reflected in gestures of the robots. So much for the implementation. That was sort of like what we've implemented for the purpose of demonstration. And then after that, I think it's okay if I continue with something that wasn't in this paper. We did the empirical evaluation of this. So we've basically showed coherent spatial movement and incoherent spatial movement, also coherent gestures and incoherent gestures to participants in a storytelling setting. And then we asked them to rate the perception of the overall performance. And on one hand, we could show that the coherent use of spatial movement and coherent use of the pantomime, we called it like appropriate gestures, is more appreciated than coherent use. And then in a follow-up study, we also showed that the combination actually of both the spatial movement and the pantomime was more appreciated than using one of those designs alone. Okay, let me just see what I have there. Okay, so this is going a little bit further. I also hope that's all right, because this is going beyond the demonstration paper. So the next step we took was making this more interactive, in the sense that once we've basically trained the robots to use the schematics, we also wanted to make use of those schematics, because our first claim was it seems to be a part of physicality, so humans should also be aware of those concepts, those schemas. So we sort of made an interactive version in which the robots are presenting a story to a user, and at a certain point in the story, there is a decision point for example, one robot asks if they should abandon the other character in the story. The robot turns to the audience and asks, what shall I do? And then the user can, with a simple thumbs up or thumbs down, influence some non-verbal feedback to influence the course of the story. And then the robots pick up that signal and will change the course of the story live during the performance. To also connect the schematics that the robots are using with schematics that the user can use. And that was, research questions that we haven't answered. So here's a little video of how the robotic interaction might look like. If I have a bit more time, I can show that. So open research questions there, which we couldn't address because this actually requires humans to be in a room with the robots. How does this interaction work? Like, how is this performance or interaction appreciated? And then this would be a demonstration here. Turn on the sound. And we can see that the robots can turn to the audience, can interact with the user. And we have a live input of the user, me in that case. It also, so the system is also able to understand facial expressions and modulate the response, whether it's just positive or negative, in combination with the facial expression, whether it's positive or negative or surprised facial expressions. And they are also being incorporated to modulate the performance. And then the robots react accordingly. So again, here we can see the actual theme, the walk line of the paper. So the robots move further apart or closer together during the interaction. And then one last slide, this is just an overview to describe the system a bit further. Right, we used hand gesture recognition and facial emotion recognition to derive the interaction. And sorry, Anna, could you tell me how much longer I have? Lost track of time.
You have minus minutes left, but we have 8 minutes left till the end of the session. Okay,
then I'll just finish with this very last. So this is for people who are interested in the interaction version. This is the interactive paper. And then this is what I want to conclude with. This is the very last sort of like concluding piece of my doctoral studies, I hope, apart from the dissertation, which is a conceptual framework for all of this. So for all sorts of robotic movement. And with this, I finish, yeah.
Great, thank you. Who has questions for Philip?
Oh, I saw you gave me the time in the chat. Yeah. I see it now, yeah.
I'm not sure it was the most effective way of giving people times, but it's a bit difficult to hold up bits of paper. You know.
Thank you.
Okay. I'm going to firstly just sympathise because of the difficulty of doing this kind of work over the past year and a half. It's appalling timing for your poor PhD, but it seems to have moved on quite a bit as well since the paper, which is good. There's the progress, but it's made in a completely different direction. I was quite interested in something that you talked about just at the very end there, where you had the different emojis and representing the different emotions. And I know that's not actually what you talked about, but it just sort of caught my eye because I'm quite interested in emotional modeling, and you've basically got thumbs up, thumbs down, or middle. Is that something that you might explore a little bit more?
So for the emotional component, we actually took another slight turn there. Instead of using it from the embodied perspective, we also want to shift back to the storytelling perspective. So we are applying, so in that latest paper that I show, we kind of like, one hand is sort of like focused on performance, which talks about these aspects of those schematics, and the other hand is a interpretive approach in which text generated by a system and then also be evaluated on the basis of these schematics, considering affect, right? Considering emotional dimensions of text. Yeah.
That'll be interesting to see. Okay. Do we have any other questions? Leonids, yeah.
Hi, Philip. Thanks for the presentation. Really happy to see how this all progressed. This is just a wild speculative question. I was wondering, so now that you have embodiment and this is the second channel of communication, basically, would there be a way of testing this by taking away parts of the text, especially in places where some of this movement goes on, or maybe the gestures go on, and then see whether readers or listeners can still understand what's going on? Would that be an interesting way to test things?
Yeah, thank you for the question. That was actually one of the hypotheses we also wanted to test, to see how much people can infer from the simple movement. We actually have a study about that we wanted to do. So I actually have videos ready for that, but it's not there yet. So yeah, but that's definitely a component. If you claim that they add something, okay, then let's just subtract what they don't add and see what's left over, basically.
Will you have the opportunity to conduct these experiments before the end of your PhD?
I guess it depends on me. Yeah, I'm trying. So I'm collaborating there with somebody in the field of gestures to have it more grounded, and there's a bit of delay in those research as well. So technically, it should be doable. Yeah.
Yeah. I think everyone understands that technically it should be doable, and if it can happen, it can happen. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Any final questions for Philip? Okay. We will have a break now, and then we'll be back again at 1600, 4 p.m. UK time. We'll have 2 more presentations from Ningma and Donya Quick, and then that's our last session before we join the plenary. So see you all in 12.5 minutes, whatever time that is in your time zone. Thanks, Philip.
Right. So welcome back. Now we are going to continue with our show and tell session. Now the next speaker, it's they are talking about Amy creating musical composition with a coherent long-term structure. They are Ningma, Guy Brown, and Paolo Vecchiotti. I don't know how to pronounce. So they are showing that this Amy creating musical compositions with a coherent long-term structure in this show and tell session, demo session. Over to you.
Thank you. Let me just share my screen. Yeah, it works. I hope the audio works. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about the kind of work I've been doing, building a artificial intelligence for generating music. So I'm Nima, so I'm from Sheffield University. So I've been working with Professor Guy Brown and also Dr. Paolo Vecchiotti before COVID started for over a year. And then we've been working with various musicians. So they all kind of started with a local Sheffield band called Reverend The Makers. So John McCure is the lead singer. Then, we kind of discussing using machine learning technology to build something that can generate music to help musicians generating music. So so along the line, we've been also working kind of with Dean Honer, who's a producer, also based in Sheffield, and also Brian who came to visit us a couple of years ago, and also more recently we've been kind of start to collaborating with Massive Attack. So, like I say, the idea of generating AI tools for musicians is not really about replacing musicians along this process. Really, what it's about is to providing some tools that allow musicians and to help their creativity process. So along this line, we actually been working on several different software tools. So the music melodies is what I'm going to talk about today. And then also we created tools to generate lyrics based on kind of user input. Also, another aspect is about sound generation. We've been working on using AI technology to directly generate novel sound that musician can use to in their music. So I think I'll just play a few examples first. So I don't know whether the audio can work. Oh, does it work? No. That'll be for some reason audio doesn't work. How do I share audio?
You may need to change the setting in Zoom, perhaps.
Let me just
share screen.
Let me stop sharing and I'm trying to share my screen again.
I'm just looking in the audio settings to see if we can work it out. We are.
There's something really great. So yeah, so I'll play some more example toward the end. So just to show you some ideas. So we created AMI, which stands for Artificial Musical Intelligence. So the whole idea is we want to create something that can produce music melodies that has a very kind of coherent long-term structure. So this kind of there has been a lot of similar work, like especially Google has been doing on this Magenta project. So the idea is behind it is very similar. That's we use a transformer. So it's a deep neural network model that has been very popular in natural language processing. So this is called transformer, and that has been extended to various kind of variation like GPT-2 or GPT-3. That people use for generating languages. So we apply that similar kind of machine learning technique that can produce music pieces, but also maintaining a coherent structure that can last, 3 or 4 minutes. Also, what AMI can do is to handle various instruments. It can directly manipulate different instrumentations according to the needs. And finally, we train the models from kind of classical music, so that AMI can learn what sounds nice together, what's kind of nice chords, and what's the melodies sound good. Then we fine tune the models towards different music genres like electronic music, jazz, and rock. And more recently, we're kind of extending into different music traditions like Chinese folk music, Arabics, and game music. So the next example I just show you that. So this piece is composed entirely by Amy from scratch, and that involves about more than a dozen of instruments. Does it sound loud enough? Yeah, so that worked really. That was is for gaming. So we produce the music for a game. So I want to briefly talk about how Amy works. So like I said, it's based on a machine learning model that typically involve preparing data. So the model can learn from the data how the music sounds good together. So we use MIDI data. So we use a lot of kind of classical MIDI as a starting point. Then we also involve MIDIs of a real human performance. So, conventionally MIDI are associated with this kind of very mechanical kind of sound, but we actually involve lots of data that's captured from human performers, so that for the MIDI can capture the dynamics and kind of the groovy aspects of the music as well in the data. So that gave us the data, so we can train the models. Then the models, after you trained, we can use to infer kind of new examples from the mathematical models. So like I said, we use this transformer model. So it's based on GPT-2. This is kind of popular model that people have been using for generating articles. And so it's very essentially, the brief idea is it's a sequential model. So it's very like, when you type in your smartphone, it predicts what's the next word from your history. But what it can do is building this so-called attention mechanism that's really allow the model to pay attention to very part of the history, not necessarily the immediate history. So that gives the model a lot of power to model a very long sequence of data that's otherwise very difficult to model using some other techniques. So the problem with modeling the music is you can see the two-dimensional. So you've got along the y-axis you have the frequency, different pitches, different notes. Then you've got the time. And the transform model tend to be used to model a sequence of data like a text, which is one-dimensional data. So in order to convert kind of two-dimensional music data into a sequence of tokens, so one-dimensional data. So we use various ways of kind of process to do that. So we use a model very similar to what Magenta used in the past, but differently. We example the tokens based on a fraction of the beat. So it's closer to, it's like how you read the music score. So for example, here, you got left hand, right hand. Then we read from bottom to, so from lower pitch to high pitch notes, then you from left to right, then you can example not the note name, also the duration of the name, also the dynamics name, and also the timing is in the fraction of a beat. So in this case, we example each note 12 times per beat. And then also the the rest or the pause between different notes are also represented in this representation. So, so we kind of convert MIDI into this kind of format. Then we, like I said before, we start the training Amy using classical music, then gradually fine-tuning Amy to jazz, rock, different kind of genres. So the whole idea is to help the musicians so they can combine different styles. So the Amy can be used in different ways. You can directly create something from scratch. You can specify what instrument you want to include or not include, and what key signature you want to be, and what sort of style you want to be. Or you can actually provide something as a prompt so that Amy can continue the conversation for you. So I just want to show you an example. So I use Chopin's famous Nocturne, Opus 9, number 2, as a prompt. So that's what I gave to Amy, right? Then I specify, okay, because it's classical music, I want to generate something classical. So I say, well, I can select classical style. So I want to show you the kind of process of training. So I first trained Amy on about 10,000 of kind of MIDI pieces of music. So let's see what it gets to produce. So basically, it doesn't really work well. So I gave you more examples, and you will notice music chords start to appear, but that's kind of lack of coherent structure. So you start to produce something that actually sounds okay, but there's no kind of coherent structure. You don't know where it's going, and it doesn't really always relate to what it produced before. So this is trained on a 10,000 piece of music. Then I end up training over 1 million examples. Right, so the same kind of 2 bars of Chopin music as a prompt, but different models start to produce very different. At least one, at least to me, it sounds more coherent throughout the piece. It sounds kind of convincing. Interesting. I play some example to my wife, and she always thought, oh, that's definitely machine composed music. So I play several examples, then I play some, okay, let's hear this one. Then he said, oh, yeah, then you can tell this is definitely not machine. You can tell, you know, it has certain kind of characteristics that human performers, a musician tend to use, but then actually that's also produced by the AI. So it starts to kind of produce something more convincing. So I just want to give you some more examples. Like I said, now I can show you the live demo, but it's very difficult without kind of face to face. So this one is actually we kind of fitting 8 bars from the electro opera scores as a prompt. Then I I use Amy fine-tune on Chinese folk music. So the first about 15 seconds are from the original electro opera. Then the rest is kind of composed by Amy. So the prompt stop here. Right. So so again, to me, that kind of Amy did a pretty good job here. That's kind of blending the prompt with the rest of the generation. I don't know whether you can tell. Some of them, the beginning is from the original score, but the rest actually from Amy. So this one is interesting. So I fine-tuned Amy on all the James Bond movie main themes. So not necessarily the main theme James Bond, but also on various kind of movies in the past, about 23 of them, and then see what it generates. So you got that James Bond style. So the next one, I'm okay with time. So the next one is a Super Mario. So I pass 15 seconds of the original Super Mario main theme music, and then the rest is generated by Amy. So I stopped there. So that's actually kind of, we've been talking to very kind of gaming industry. That's a very interesting kind of in using AI, because what they're trying to do is they use the musician compose the music for them, but then they want to generate something different for each stage of the game, but maintaining the same kind of style, and that's actually is a very kind of tedious job. So this one reason we're doing this kind of gaming is that allow them to create something slightly different, but based on the original kind of score. I think I probably escaped some of this kind of classical. This is Chopin piece. So this is just created from scratch without giving any prompt. That's this one. I quite like this one. that's from direct from scratch. This is jazz style. Yeah, that's the one I played at the beginning. Yeah, I think that's the same one I played at the beginning. Right, so I think I'm kind of running out of time. If I got 1 more minute, I can just show you. So if I stop sharing and reshare my screen. So this is kind of website we created for the musicians. And so up here, you can choose different kind of A/B models. For example, you like maybe classic. Then up here, you can upload something as a prompt. You want to start from the prompt, or you want to start from scratch. So I trained on different styles. So let's say, I don't know, Beethoven. Then you can say what instrument you want to include or you don't want to include. So that includes about 108 MIDI instrument. You can say, so you want something acoustic piano, for example, and different key. I want D major, something more grand. Yeah, let's see whether. So this is live demo. Is most of the time doesn't work. So this is running our kind of my local survey. It's not very fast, so it take a while to generate something. So again, because I select only grand piano, so it only use a piano. So the idea is, if you think that's something you like, you can continue. When you continue composing, you can then change. I want something more rocky. I want to change style, change to rock, even change key signature, then continue. Oh, actually, I forgot to, yeah. It was difficult because I thought the model only to compose something in piano. Yeah, so I don't know whether that makes any difference. Yeah, that's more rocky. That's rocky actually. Yeah. Anyway, so that's the idea. So so these kind of tools, musician can use to help them. They can create something by fusing different style, different genres. If they like, they can download the MIDI and download the MP3. They can load into their own kind of favorite software for more kind of processing. So I'll just stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I didn't want to interrupt the music. You are over the time, but if there are questions, we can make some quick questions. There is a question from Simon, please.
There's a question from Sven in the chat as well. Sven got there first.
Oh,
sorry about that.
I can read it. For the generation using Amy, what happens if you pick atypical instruments, so non-standard instruments?
So we use 108 from the MIDI instrument. So it will cover most of the instrument, actually, even including some kind of other heritage, like African kind of folk instrument.
Okay. Well, I'll ask my question unless Sven wants to come back in. But so I'm supervising a PhD student, Berke Banner, who presented his work at Evo Musart this week, or the poster session. It's something quite similar, but a different angle. So he's training a GPT-2 model, or fine-tuning it with music. Mm-hmm. And rather than trying to do what pretty much everyone else wants to do, which is to make great music which sounds like it comes from the distribution that you trained over, he's trying to make use of the bits which people throw away. So the first piece he played, the Chopin, which was crazy, we would call that an extreme passage, and he's written a system which tries to incorporate that. Not quite as bad as that. That would be more noisy. But there's, you've all heard the generative music, which is far too fast, far too many notes in a bar, far too bigger intervals, repetition. And he's questioning whether you can actually usefully incorporate that to expand our understanding of music. And he does it by explicitly not training a model to perfection. So he stops when the loss is a certain level, and he incorporates lots of different models with different losses trained towards, so he can, the user of the system can mix and match the more extreme and the less extreme pieces. And I just wonder whether you'd be interested in doing something like that. You have this amazing system, but and again, I haven't seen the paper, but would you be interested in trying to bend the genres a bit to try and, see if we can find new musical tastes out there, not just.
Yeah, that's absolutely. I love if we can collaborate on anything musical, and I was very careful not to overfit the model. So it's similar. I don't want the model to be exactly reproducing exactly what's being trained on. So along the line, we've been doing various techniques. I encode this kind of. So the model I'm using also based on GPT-2, but I trained from scratch rather than fine-tuning it. But we kind of encoded a lot of different embeddings to encode different positions and different bits, even the phrases. The musical phrases are also encoded, so the model knows if it's the start of the music or in the middle or toward the end. So it's trying to create something different. But absolutely, yeah, I should get in touch.
If after more exposure, your wife might prefer your generated music rather than the Chopin originals. That would be, and the question is how you could achieve that.
It's being, like I said, we've been working with various musicians, and everyone has a different way of working and different taste. Music is very subjective, there's no kind of good or bad music. Some very popular music, some musicians hate.
I found that Berkeley's music is quite exhilarating.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I think we should move on. If there are more questions, you can post them in the chat. So let's continue with our next speaker, Tony Quick and Christopher Burrows. They have the paper is Jazzy Beach Critters, a demonstration of real-time music generation with application to games. Please, over to you.
Hi. So I'm only going to keep my camera on for a little bit here, basically just to say, hello, I'm a human. I'm having some internet fun today. If I disappear at an inopportune time, I sent you and Anna a short 5-minute video that shows my system working, and hopefully that could be a backup if I vanish. Fingers crossed that I don't vanish and I can actually show everything in real time. Okay, so I'm going to turn my video off now. All right, I'm just getting I have a couple of slides, and then I'm going to try to just jump right into things, internet willing. Can I first, I'm going to play some notes here. Could everybody hear that? Yes, okay, I saw a thumbs up, good. All right, that means my system audio is working, and I can go ahead and screen share. Okay, and Zoom has largely disappeared. I'm just going to assume everybody can see what I'm looking at and go from there. So Jazzy Beach Critters is a little Unity scene that Chris Burrows and I put together, exploring a couple of questions. And okay, there we go, now we're full screened. So the first question that we were interested in is, can we generate novel game music, like a soundtrack, on the fly at the score level? And the vast majority of games use pre-rendered audio for their music. So if they're going to have some sort of a dynamic soundtrack that changes based on what's going on in the game, it usually involves crossfading audio, not choosing actual new notes to adapt to the situation. There are some people who have explored what you can do at the score level, but everything I've seen on that side still has some sort of a pre-composed database of scores to pull from. Whereas what we were interested in is basically, what if you don't have some kind of a database to rely on? You just have your generative models and you have to come up with everything on the fly. And in the context of a game, that imposes some time constraints that just don't exist for generative music in the broader sense. Like if you're going to generate, say, a chorale in the style of Bach, and you can do that within 2 or 3 seconds, in the field of generative music, that's great. That's a really good speed, but it's too slow if you're trying to do a game soundtrack that is adaptive. So we said, but what about improvisational music like jazz, where there isn't necessarily much that's fixed about it. It can change rapidly, and it's something people do in real time, which tends to suggest that computationally that's going to be a little easier for a computer to do in real time. And then we looked at what are the sort of underlying technical issues associated with this. So we used Unity, and there are some interesting timing issues associated with using a game platform like Unity to deal with generative music sorts of things. And what sorts of time scales are appropriate for adapting to changes in the environment and user actions. So now what I'm going to try to do is open the actual application, and unfortunately there's no way for me to mute this, so it's going to be going beep boop the whole time I'm talking. Hopefully that's not too distracting. All right, so this is Jazzy Beach Critters. Hopefully you can all still hear me clearly over the critters. We have 3 of them. There's a snail on the left, a hermit crab in the middle, and a crab on the right. I also hope that you can see my mouse cursor. I'll try, if you can't, I'll try my best to describe what I'm doing. Each of these critters is playing their own music, so they're all playing together like a band. Nothing is pre-composed here. Nothing is pre-rendered to audio. All of the sound synthesis is taking place within the Unity environment. And there's this chord that's changing in the upper left. That's a shared piece of information that all of the critters have to work with. And the chord context changes randomly every measure or two. The critters don't get much advanced knowledge of what's coming, so they get a little bit of notice to generate their music for the next chord that's coming. They don't have, they can't see farther into the future than that. So I have the Apple button selected here, which is food, and that will attract the critters so I can move them around with this. And the audio should have a spatial component to it. Let's bring the critters up in front. Now let's use some of the other buttons here. So we can interact with the critters a couple other ways. So I've selected the poke button here. The critters don't terribly like being poked, so they have moods. Right now they're happy. They're all playing coherently together. The music sounds good. Let's annoy them a little bit. So now they're playing a little bit less. They're not quite as happy. Let's keep poking them. And now we have sort of a ugly mess. The critters are rather unhappy. The snail has gone into his shell. This is button number 2 here is the pet button. So let's pet the critters and hopefully make them happy again, and they'll come back towards us. So notice that the style was changing through that. The transitions were all smooth, that we didn't have any delays or anything. The music was all cohesive until we got to the completely chromatic bit, which is deliberately supposed to sound messy. Everything else sounded smooth. We can also just ask the critters to play a slightly different style when they're happy. And if I move these guys out of the way a little bit, see, oh, well, they're going for the same piece of food there. Okay, I need to get the crab just a bit farther back. And now I can use this fourth button. So this lets us trade solos with the crab so we can actually play some things. You'll have to forgive my terrible playing here. It's really hard to do this with the mouse. The crab is leading, so he's actually deciding what key we're going to play in. And this will just keep going. The crab will keep picking new keys. To point out some of the graphical elements here, let me put it back to the default case. As the critters are playing notes, these little note sprites are being emitted in sync with the score. And we have sort of 3 layers of sound timing going on in this. So one is the sound effect. So if I put an apple down, there's a little ting sound associated with that. The most important thing for that is being in sync with a graphical change. So that's okay to be locked at your sort of 30 frames per second, 60 frames per second, whatever your graphical update rate is. The music, on the other hand, can't operate at that rate. It actually has to have a completely separate process that has a much tighter, fine-grained timing. If I were to play the music synced at the graphical rate, it would sound laggy and horrible. When the music changes based on reactions, such if I make the crab angry, that's sort of yet a third temporal scale. That needs to be aligned to when it musically makes sense to introduce some kind of a change. If you do those too quickly, you're going to mess up your metrical structure, you'll mess up your sense of key, you won't have something that sounds like traditional music. So those are our 3 time scales that we have with that, and the spacebar also does something, just a little sort of an Easter egg. We'll get a nice big wave that comes through. The drum that's going on in the background is actually responsible for the wave patterns. It's triggering waves. They start a little bit off the screen at this resolution, so it's kind of hard to see that. Okay, I'm sort of having a hard time hearing myself think with the critters playing at this point, so I'll exit that and go back to the slides for a little bit. So some of these slides I just had basically in case I couldn't show you things through the game. The game, as it happened, worked just fine, so I will skip this. This is just summarizing what I just said about these 3 levels of sort of temporal granularity that we had to deal with, that sound effects need to be at the graphical rate. Sound from musical notes has to be at a much faster rate. There has to be less than 10 milliseconds variance for things to sound synchronized. And the mood changes or style changes or any sort of big thematic change, I guess, in the music has to have a sensible musical boundary. And for us in this demo, it's at measure or bar lines in the music. I'm sort of not sure how I'm doing on time at the moment. This is a figure from the paper, so the generative strategy is described in more detail there. Basically, we generate the music in segments for as long as we can have consistent music. So basically from possible transition boundary to possible transition boundary. We only have fractions of a second to generate that. So we allow a quarter of a second or less to generate each one of those segments in advance. And then we have sort of the time between that and the next generative call to collect any environmental information that we need to respond in the next generation. There's also a web demo for this. So I'll show the URL again at the end of the slides. You can run it in your browser as long as you're on a Mac or Windows machine. If you use Chrome, that's a good browser to use with it. Unfortunately, it doesn't work on iOS and Android. The web demo is using a shared backend with another project that I've been working on called Musica. And that's a more purely interactive music project, but it has something very interesting that has emerged in like the last few months that I'm really hoping to bring over to Jazzy Beach Critters soon. And I'm actually going to come back to this slide in just a second and show you this more interesting interactive music thing that I'm hoping to bring into Jazzy Beach Critters. So here, the computer is actually analyzing what I'm playing and responding, reusing my motifs. This is truly interactive music. It's not just sort of waiting for you to take a turn and then doing its own thing. And since that works using the exact same framework that we're using right now for the web version of Jazzy Beach Critters, and it works on the music project, it should just be a matter of making a few updates on the Unity side to essentially ask for that more sophisticated feature, and we should have that very soon. I'm really looking forward to that. Where we're interested in heading with this, aside from just that one immediate update in the near future, I'm interested in making this a bit more game-like. So an obvious extension to this would be having some sort of a points system. You know, how good was your solo? Have the crab respond to you a bit better, give some sort of feedback on how well you're doing playing in the keys that the crab is asking for. We could also have some more complex critter behavior to make it a little bit more interesting to manage them. Right now they're pretty passive, but it would become a little bit more game-like. For example, if you had to keep the music good whilst the critters also kind of moved around on their own, and maybe they didn't like each other, so maybe the critters could make each other angry. You have more tasks to do. Or we could have something where you can basically earn new critters to do new and different music as you're playing better music in the soloing, things like that. We're also interested in sort of like a Peter and the Wolf sort of game where you have a story-driven game where the soundtrack is entirely generated by the characters in the game. Obviously, that's a much bigger effort, but that was the direction we were thinking when we initially started this project. And feedback that we've gotten along the way, everybody that we've showed this little demo to who has kids says, oh, this would be great on a tablet or something to let kids play with it. So we think there are some good opportunities there to make, especially for touch screens, interactive musical things that help kids to learn about music whilst having fun and have something that's truly a new experience each time. So I will stop there. There's the URL that has more information about the project and a link to the online demo, and that's our contact information. I guess I'll take questions now.
Thank you very much. We have some time for some quick questions. If you have some quick questions, we have a couple of minutes. And the same if you want to post them in the chat, or maybe you want to contact the authors later.
I just wanted to say that my daughter absolutely loved that. She came and joined for a bit. So yeah, the idea of a music education tool for children. Yep. Thumbs up from her.
I am really hoping that we can explore that. Unity actually just came out with a new input handler that I'm really hoping is going to be much better suited to touchscreens. Their current input handler is a little iffy with touchscreen devices. Like sometimes it detects their location correctly, sometimes it detects it fully across the screen. So we were really waiting for that kind of fix to come out. So that's something that we're going to be doing soon, is seeing what this new input handler that just came out this year, does that let us finally do this and have a nice touchscreen experience that we could give to kids and let them have some fun with this.
Right, I think there are no more questions. I also think it's a very nice project, a very nice application in games, without this kind of losing the rhythm and things. It's impressive, and for learning as well, it's a very good idea. Thank you very much for this. I think it was a very good demo. And I think I have to say thank you to all of the speakers. Thank you to all of you. It has been a very good symposium, very good time for us. And we hope to continue seeing the work that you're presenting in future symposiums of computational creativity. Anna, do you want to add something?
Yeah, just add my thanks as well. It's been such a range of talks. It's been fabulous, and so many nice discussions that we've cut short brutally. So apologies. So Juan and I, in the future, after PhD write-ups have completed, right, we're looking at possibly doing a special issue of the papers from this symposium. That would include the show and tell demos, if you're able to work it up into a journal paper as well. We will be in touch with people about that, because it's not going to be in the next few months, right? So we'll be in touch with people about that. And the only other thing to mention was that, so Anna Akantasalo and I were talking about maybe setting up some kind of sort of discussion event in the summer, just a chance for us to all chat a bit more informally, which I guess it will go out on the Computational Creativity Google discussion group. If you're not a member of that, if you just search for Computational Creativity Google discussion group, you'll probably find it. So I don't know if anything will happen with that, but I thought I'd mention it. And thank you, Juan, because without Juan, this symposium would not have happened. And it's great to have the 7th running happen, and eventually, after a year, thank you everyone for sticking with us. And hopefully there will be the 8th running next year, with any luck. We might even get to be in person.
Hopefully, yeah. Hopefully we'll be in person. It will be very nice.
Could I just say well done to the organisers, and thank you very much. It's been a very interesting symposium.
Thank you.
Under difficult circumstances. Very, very good. So well done.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Right. Okay. It's been such a great afternoon. So we have the plenary still, obviously not organised as part of this symposium. It's back in the main room. Sabine, I think, has been here for most of the afternoon, but is clearly off to prepare for her plenary presentation now. So that looks like a great way to finish off the AISB convention. Right, folks. Right. Thanks very much. I'll see you in the plenary.
See you. Bye. Thank you.
Bye.